Chapter 591. Seriously speaking, at the end of her previous life, Gong Yimo returned without her armor. There was a reason why she lost her will. The nightmares that haunted her, the irritation in her heart, and the uneasiness of being cursed and hated by others, were all symptoms of post-war stress syndrome. Many people who had experienced war would encounter this kind of psychological illness after going to the battlefield. It manifested as a lack of fighting spirit, like a walking corpse, or becoming abnormally irritable, drinking, killing, and so on. After Gong Yimo died and was reborn, she got a chance to start over, which made her psychological illness a lot better. Starting over, she was full of hope for everything. But now, the entire palace was filled with gloom, and the imperial physician left an assertion that Gong Cheng would not live for long. Gong Yimo could not redeem all of this, but she could not escape. In the process of facing it, self-blame and guilt greatly stimulated her heart, stimulating her to recall the past that she did not want to remember. So when she woke up today, she was so uneasy, as if Gong Dai was her last salvation. But when she received a trace of comfort from Gong Dai at Qi Manor, it instantly disappeared when she saw Gong Cheng. How could he be so thin? He was like a large skeleton. The silky yellow robe on his body highlighted the outline of his skeleton. All the fat on his body was quickly consumed in the past few days, and his body was damaged to the point where it could no longer absorb new fat, so he would only become thinner, and finally die of starvation. Tears unconsciously fell on the back of Gong Cheng's hand. Why was he so thin, so scarily thin? Gong Cheng's hand moved, as if his heart felt something. He saw the person sitting by his bed crying. How could he be reconciled? If it were not for the chaos caused by her, he could still be alive. How could he not be angry? If it were not for her, Chang she would not have died. His 2 sons would not be hostile because of her. If it were not for her, he would not be in a dilemma, saving one and hurting the other. How could he not hate her? She was so dangerous, but he cared about Gong Dai, so he could not kill her. If he kept her alive, his Daiyu state's rivers and mountains would be hanging on a knife's edge. Sometimes, he would also think, how could there be such a troublesome woman in this world? He was simply a scourge. It was God's punishment, the Snow Clan's curse, retribution. But looking at her silently crying by his bedside, thousands of emotions flashed through Gong Cheng's heart. In the end, he still couldn't bear it. She was still a child. She had already tried her best to do everything well, but she didn't know that there was nothing perfect in this world. When Gong Yimo saw that Gong Che had woken up, she couldn't hold it in anymore. Her cries grew louder and louder. Not for anything else, but for Gong Che's sunken eyes and his mouth that was so thin that it couldn't close. She was so upset that she couldn't stop herself from crying. Gong Cheng looked at her with a pair of terrifyingly big eyes. She cried more and more miserably. Gong Cheng was a little flustered. He didn't know what expression to use to face Gong Yimo. At first glance, he looked a little innocent. Don't cry. He did not know how to coax little girls, but this was the first time he had seen Gong Yimo cry so hard. I am not dead yet. Gong Yimo cried even louder. It was all her fault. It was all her fault. Although she didn't know what exactly she was blaming herself for, she felt an unspeakable sense of guilt and remorse. If she had known earlier, she wouldn't have come back. She should have left Daiyu State far away. Perhaps Gong Cheng would still be alive and well. Don't cry, Gong Cheng sighed. At this time, he sat up with some effort. Because of the lack of fat, when he moved, the friction between his bones made him feel extremely uncomfortable. But he just frowned. Half lying on the dragon bed, he reached out to wipe Gong Yimo's tears. Gong Yimo's ears were very sharp. She clearly heard the sound of Gong Cheng's bones rubbing against each other. She wanted to help him up, but she didn't know where to start. It was as if she exerted a little force, Gong Cheng would fall apart. So she could only cry like a helpless child. Gong Cheng didn't dare to touch her face. He always felt that if he touched her face, it would probably be flooded. He closed his eyes and waited for Gong Yimo to finish crying. Gong Yimo was just venting, but it wasn't endless. She cried for a while and gradually calmed down. It was as if her spirit had been sucked out of her. Under the silence, there was only undissolvable melancholy. Imperial Father, Do you hate me? She thought a lot when she came. She felt that Gong Cheng should hate her. If it wasn't for her, Gong Che wouldn't be like this. If it wasn't for her, he wouldn't be on the verge of death. Chang she wouldn't die, and those imperial guards wouldn't die. Sometimes, she suddenly wondered if Gong Dai and Gong Che's lives would be different if she didn't exist in her previous life. Would it be better? Gong Cheng didn't open his eyes. He seemed to be thinking with his eyes closed. After a while, he spoke softly. When I first opened my eyes and saw you, I still hated you. The corners of Gong Yimo's eyes were red. When she heard that, she lowered her head even more. Gong Cheng smiled gently and opened his eyes. But after you sat here for a while, I suddenly don't hate you anymore. Gong Yimo looked at Gong Cheng in surprise, as if she wanted to see if he was telling the truth. She almost killed him. Why didn't he hate her? Perhaps when a person is about to die, he sees things more clearly. Gong Cheng's voice was very soft. He looked at Gong Yimo and suddenly had a desire to speak. He was disappointed with his two sons. They only cared about personal matters and didn't care about the big picture. However, he loved and hated Gong Yimo. His love came from her, but his hatred came from his sons. But at this moment, he knew that he didn't have long to live. He didn't know why, but he suddenly saw things more lightly. He was no longer so constrained by life and death. He really did it. Without you, I might have died a long time ago. Back then, Nan of Gojosian offered me addictive tobacco. If you didn't teach Gong Dai well, I wouldn't have escaped that disaster. I might have died a long time ago. He wasn't wrong. After all, compared to his previous life, Gong Cheng had lived a few more years. But Gong Yimo just couldn't forgive herself. He could have lived longer. Gong Cheng sighed softly. You have made countless contributions for the country, for the world. In a few years, the world will be prosperous and the 4 countries will prosper. Half of this is due to your contribution. So, Moa, you are very good. She was so good that even his most outstanding child liked her. Moreover, for her, he could give up anything. Previously, he didn't understand. He felt that nothing could be compared to his country. However, after thinking about it, he understood. With such an outstanding daughter, no outstanding man would give up on her. It was just like how Gong Che refused to let go even though he didn't receive any response. This was because no man would let go after falling in love with her, unless he wasn't by her side. If he was, he would definitely fight until the end. Chapter 592. She had no choice, she had to fight until the end. Gong Yimo was still silent. She felt that these were just excuses for Gong Cheng to appease her. It was ridiculous that she was so useless. Even now, she still needed her sick father to enlighten her. Gong Cheng suddenly asked, "What's the matter with your poison?" Gong Yimo glanced at him, then quickly whispered what happened in the Shui clan's treasure. But she didn't mention the Shui clan. She only said that in order to survive, she was forced to take a drug to make her crazy. Hearing this, Gong Cheng sighed. Perhaps this was fate. Is there really no antidote? Gong Yimo shook her head. She couldn't find anything in the Shui clan's treasure. She could only accept her fate. The legendary antidote had just been developed, but it was all killed by the Shui clan's king. Because the king didn't need the antidote, only the poison. Gong Cheng seemed to have given up. He thought for a long time before saying, "Your mother said, the Shui clan's treasure is your treasure. It may kill you, but it will also give you supreme power." Gong Yimo was stunned. In her opinion, the Shui clan's sacred stone was useless. It would only be a disaster if it was kept. So when she came out of the treasure, she blew up the exit so that no one could enter or leave. She really couldn't see how the treasure could give her supreme power. Was the so-called power to go crazy? I think that's all nonsense. Gong Yimo knew in her heart that there was no cure for this poison because its raw material came from a meteorite. Everything in the world had a counter to it, but if it didn't belong to this land, how could it be countered? Gong Dai also knew this, but he didn't want to give up. Mo Gong Cheng sighed. This matter, I don't blame you, nor Gong Che. You don't blame yourself. Speaking of Gong Che, Gong Yimo lowered her head. She thought too simply. It was always easy to put herself in his shoes. She always thought that after Gong Che knew that she was Gong Dai's woman, he would give up, but she was too naive. When she entered the palace, she asked herself over and over again, what would happen if she loved someone deeply but could not get any response? Perhaps they would give up. Perhaps they would be like Gong Che, throwing caution to the wind like moths to a flame. Gong Yimo suddenly covered her face. Last time, she actually had a feeling that the Gu poison was about to erupt, but she suppressed it later. She felt lucky, but she didn't expect Gong Che to accidentally trigger the Gu poison. She really couldn't imagine if she really killed Gong Che. What would Dai Yu State do? What would happen to her? She might never forgive herself for the rest of her life. Therefore, she did not dare to look at Gong Che now. She was afraid that if he died, then Imperial Father would also die. Once she returned, would her hands be stained with the blood of her loved ones? Imperial Father, you should blame me. Gong Yimo's voice was tired. She came to the palace today to face it and ask for forgiveness. Because after this time, she had fully understood that she was a fickle woman. Gong Dai could not bear to punish her, but she couldn't let herself continue to hurt people. Emperor Gong shook his head. This is not your fault. I can only say that fate is playing with people. If it wasn't for the Snowlingji, why would she be like this? Emperor Gong gradually made a decision in his heart. He asked, if I abolish your martial arts, will it weaken your power when you go crazy? Gong Yimo pursed her lips and told him the truth. It's useless. The Gu poison has changed my body. Now, I can easily heal after being injured. Therefore, abolishing her martial arts is useless. Then, what about taking some medicine to seal your meridians? Emperor Gong asked again. It's useless. Once it acts up, all the medicine's medicinal properties will be washed away. This point was already confirmed by Gong Che. The room suddenly quieted down. Only the calming incense in the incense burner rose. Emperor Gong closed his eyes and said, you didn't do anything wrong, and I don't blame you. But even if I lock you up, I'm afraid you'll be a hidden danger. First, she was much stronger than Shwewaxi. The iron prison might not be able to hold her. Second, Gong Dai wouldn't be willing to let Gong Yimo suffer the pain of imprisonment. I also don't want you to marry Gong Dai. If Gong Che doesn't wake up, Gong Dai will have to take responsibility. I can't put you by his side and let him face danger at all times. I can't let the Dai Yu State fall into danger with him. Gong Yimo didn't speak. She agreed with Emperor Gong's decision and understood his concerns. But her heart was in pain. That kind of pain spread to her limbs and bones, but she couldn't find the source. Emperor Gong frowned and continued, all methods are useless. Mo-er, are you willing to be buried with Imperial Father? He actually asked this in front of Gong Yimo. Gong Yimo suddenly raised her head to look at him. Sure enough, there was no complaint in his eyes, only helplessness. Yes, there was no cure for her poison. Rather than waiting for her to kill Gong Dai and massacre the Imperial Palace, it would be better to die. Only her death would be the safest. Gong Yimo's clenched hands loosened little by little. She thought of how Gong Dai worked hard for her. She thought of how Gong Dai knew there was no cure, but he still went around looking for doctors and medicine. She thought of how she made a big mistake a few days ago, but he still wanted to marry her. Unknowingly, she had become a burden to Gong Dai. When she thought of how her hands would break Gong Dai's neck one day, or dig out his heart, she trembled. Before it happened, they all thought too simply of Gu poison. They didn't know how strong her outbursts were. Moreover, it seemed to be getting more and more serious each time. At the very beginning, she heard from Gong Dai that when she went crazy, she would subconsciously protect him. But last time, she directly attacked him. Although she stopped in the end, what about the next time? What about the next time? Thinking of how Xue Wu she had become a complete madman, she didn't want to end up like her. Emperor Gong saw her silence and sighed softly. Mo-er, the road to the Yellow Springs is lonely. Accompany me. Gong Yimo completely loosened her hands and said in a deep voice. Yes, Imperial Father. Emperor Gong didn't expect her to agree so easily. He paused and pointed to the desk. I have no strength to get up. There is an imperial edict in the secret compartment of the desk. Mo, you will write the content yourself. Gong Yimo looked at the desk. She herself was going to write the imperial edict to sentence herself to death. She was a little confused. She subconsciously walked to the desk and opened the secret compartment according to the instructions. Sure enough, an imperial edict with a jade seal appeared in front of her eyes. She could write whatever she wanted, and she could also choose a way to die on it. Gong Yimo took a deep breath, picked up the brush and really wrote it down. The words in cinnabar were like blood blooming on the bright yellow imperial edict. Her eyes kept flashing with Gong Dai's appearance. Perhaps she shouldn't give up. This wasn't her style. But after such a heavy blow, she seemed to have become the empress of her previous life. She still had her elegance, but her heart was powerless. So be it. Instead of risking the danger of killing Gong Dai, it was better to commit suicide first. With the emperor by her side, she wouldn't be lonely on the road to the Yellow Springs. Chapter 593. She handed the imperial edict to Gong Cheng. Moa, don't you regret it? Gong Cheng felt that he really couldn't see through this daughter. He thought that she would fight back, just like how she had never been defeated before. But he didn't know Gong Yimo. He didn't know how unforgivable it was for her to kill innocent people. He didn't know how unacceptable it was to become a murderous madman without reason. She was tired of being called an executioner and didn't want it anymore. I don't regret it. Good, Gong Cheng closed his eyes and said. It's good that you don't regret it. Gong Yimo suddenly knelt down. Son, I only have one request. Say it. I want to marry Gong Dai. The corner of her mouth finally showed a trace of a smile, looking quite sweet. Even if I can only be his wife for a day, I will fulfill my wish. This time, Gong Cheng didn't hesitate. Jin allows it. Gong Yimo was satisfied. At this time, the door was suddenly opened. Gong Dai appeared at the door, panting. Seeing Gong Yimo safe and sound, his heart instantly calmed down. Gong Yimo got up and returned him a gentle smile, but Gong Cheng closed his eyes. Jin is tired, you can all withdraw. He said so, secretly hiding the imperial edict under the quilt. Gong Dai was a little suspicious. He didn't know what the emperor said to the royal sister. He only knew that when the royal sister entered the palace, he felt flustered and hurriedly followed her. At this time, he was afraid that it wasn't a good thing. Therefore, before leaving, Gong Ju couldn't help but ask. Imperial father. Son wants to set the wedding date for 7 days later. Imperial father, please agree. He was testing. When Gong Yimo was still in a coma, he went to the palace. The emperor said that he didn't have long to live. He also said that if there was an accident, he must take responsibility and never mention the marriage. Who knew that at this time, the emperor seemed to be relieved and chuckled. Jeanne, we'll try to live until then. Gong Dai felt even more uneasy. Gong Yimo smiled and pulled him out. Imperial father is tired, let's go out first. Gong Dai nodded and left with Gong Yimo. He knew the royal sister too well. She must have done something behind his back. Gong Yimo asked him. How is Gong Che now? She knew that Gong Dai must know Gong Che's situation. Speaking of that person, Gong Dai's eyes flashed with killing intent. But he can't kill him. At this moment, the emperor was nearing the end of his lifespan. If Gong Che were to die as well, then he would definitely be crowned as the emperor. At that time, even if he was unwilling, the best solution was to lock up Gong Yimo. To never see the light so, he can't. Even if he hated Gong Che and couldn't wait to cut him into 1,000 pieces, he can only hope that he's still alive. Only then can he have space to breathe and bring royal sister to find a way to cure the poison. I've sent a famous doctor, he won't die. Hearing Gong Dai's words with a straight face, Gong Yimo couldn't help but kiss him on the cheek. Don't blame him, he's also been punished. Moreover, after this battle, he should let go. Can he not let go? A moment of rashness caused such a result. If he doesn't let go, unless he really wants to drag Gong Yimo down with him. After being kissed by Gong Yimo, Gong Dai felt much better. It's best if Gong Che let go. It was just that this price was a little too heavy. Are you hungry? Let's go home and have some snacks. Gong Dai's voice became gentle as he asked her. Gong Yimo nodded. I'm starving. I feel like I can eat an entire cow. She exaggeratedly stretched out her hand to make a big circle. Gong Dai laughed. You can eat an entire farm if you want. This was the first time Gong Yimo held his hand in the palace. Then, I want to eat milk cakes. Under her coquettish behavior, Gong Ju's feelings of suffocation and forbearance dissipated. There's a lot of milk cakes. Gong Yimo was pleasantly surprised. But suddenly, she thought of something and looked at him seriously as she said, Don't worry. Gong Dai, on the day of our wedding, can you lock me up? Gong Dai's face darkened. Okay. I'll just wear a bracelet and ankle cuffs. Cover them under your dress, no one can see. Gong Dai suddenly felt his heart ache. He hugged Gong Yimo tightly and pressed her head against his chest. It's my fault, I didn't protect you well. Gong Yimo shook her head in his arms. You've already done very well. You've endured for me and respected all my decisions. I really feel very happy. One must know that if it wasn't for her, with Gong Dai's ruthless personality in his previous life, he wouldn't be forced to this point every time. He has a powerful weapon in his hands, a mature fire army camp, money and people, but he still tolerates. He tolerates Gong Che, tolerates Gong Cheng, tolerates Gong Che, tolerates everyone in the world. Gong Yimo hugged him and took a deep breath. All this time, I've brought you a lot of trouble. I won't anymore. Gong Dai was a little uneasy. What are you saying? How can you be trouble? Gong Yimo closed her eyes and smiled. If it's not trouble, then it's not trouble. In short, if he treats her well, she will also treat him well. If he can give up his life for her, she can also do it. After 2 days, good news finally came from the palace. Gong Che woke up. But just as Gong Yimo guessed, after Gong Che woke up and found out that the emperor didn't have long to live, he was in so much pain that he wished he was dead. He was drowned in self-blame and annoyance. He drove everyone out and didn't want to see anyone. So the empress had no other choice. She endured all her complicated emotions and begged Gong Yimo to let Gong Yimo see him. Gong Dai had been testing the effect of the holy stone on Xue Wu 11 these days, so Gong Yimo went to the palace after informing him. Gong Dai knew that after this, Gong Che didn't have the ability to do anything. In addition, the royal sister was already on guard against Gong Che and wouldn't let him have the chance to succeed. So he let the royal sister go. After passing through the layers of the palace, Gong Yimo saw Gong Che. He still couldn't refuse her request to see him. But when she came in, he was locked in a corner alone. It was as if he was trapped in his own world and couldn't extricate himself. Gong Yimo walked step by step in front of him. Brother son of heaven. In the shadows, Gong Che suddenly moved. He raised his head and saw Gong Yimo. His body unconsciously shrank back. He didn't want to hurt her, he didn't want to. Gong Yimo gave a faint smile. She squatted down and looked him in the eyes. I'm already better. Also, my matter has nothing to do with you. I don't blame you. Gong Che didn't say anything. Just when Gong Yimo thought he wouldn't say anything and was about to leave, Gong Che suddenly opened his mouth. His face was deeply buried between his knees and his elbows. Am I very useless? His voice was very hoarse. In this dark corner, there was a kind of endless loneliness. Not only did I not get you, I also harmed Imperial Father. The country and the beauty, I didn't take care of any of them. I really am a failure. Chapter 594. Gong Yimo didn't say anything. On the other side, Gong Che stuck his fingers into his hair, full of self-blame. You must think so too, so you don't like me, it's not like that. Gong Yimo stood up and looked down at him, solemnly and coldly repeating. It's not like that. Because she had already decided to end her life, there were some things that she didn't want to hide anymore. I'm good to you, I rejected you, not because of you. In the dark room, the light from outside couldn't reach this corner, so only her voice echoed. Gong Che forgot about his guilt and self-blame. He couldn't help but ask, then what is the reason? Gong Yimo sighed, walked to the corner and sat down beside him. Let me tell you a story. Gong Yimo sat on the floor, her back leaning against the wall. Her eyes were squinted and her expression was a little strange. Gong Che didn't answer. He knew that Gong Yimo wouldn't tell him a story for no reason. Gong Yimo thought for a moment, then told him about her past life, her experience after leaving the mountain, from a third-person perspective. At first, Gong Che didn't understand the meaning of her story, but as she went deeper into the story, his expression became more and more surprised. Why did that crown prince look so much like him? Why did that little girl look so much like Moa? Until the word appeared, Gong Che's expression became more serious. Only Moa had, then, this story? He didn't dare to think too much about it. Until the end of the story, when the female lead died, Gong Che didn't wake up from his daze. Why did he feel that it was so familiar? He even felt that if he was the crown prince, he would definitely do the same as in the story. But, what if that girl was Moa? In his daze, he seemed to want to catch something, but he couldn't catch anything. Gong Yimo paused, separated herself from the story, and said softly, "Do you know how unwilling that girl is?" In the darkness, her voice was slow as she described in detail. She always felt that it wasn't her fault. At least, she wasn't the main reason. However, she had to bear all the consequences. Do you know how unwilling she was? After the princes obtained the throne, they each went their own way. Internal strife began, and the throne spread to other countries. When the other countries saw the Dayu state falling apart, they all wanted a piece of the pie. This was profit and ambition. It was as if her body had opened a door and released those sins. Therefore, she was in the wrong. Therefore, she had to accept the consequences of these sins. Just because she had accepted it, it did not mean that she did not resent it. However, she still had hope in her heart. Everything she had done was for one person. That person would definitely always stand by her side, understand her, and support her. Thinking of this, Gong Yimo sneered. In the darkness, Gong Che couldn't see her face clearly, but he felt that her laughter chilled his heart. Do you know how wronged that girl felt? After Gong Yimo laughed, she asked again. Many people pointed at her and scolded her. All kinds of malicious curses were endless. She was stoned and spat on. She even saved a village out of kindness, but that village almost burned her to death. They said that if it wasn't for her, how could the world be like this? They didn't want her to pretend to be kind. Gong Che had never experienced it, but he knew the pain of not being understood and not being supported. As a man, when pushed to the extreme, he would do something irrational. However, the girl in the story didn't do that. She endured it all the way until the 4 countries were unified. At that time, people began to think of her as a good person. However, it was already too late. Some hurt couldn't be repaired. It wasn't as if the wound would disappear after an apology. Whether it was anger, resentment, or grievance, they couldn't be appeased. They could only be suppressed. Gong Yimo suddenly recalled something and told Gong Che with a smile. She still remembered that time when she was riding on a horse and saved a woman who was being kidnapped by bandits. However, after the woman was saved, she committed suicide after knowing her identity. You evil demon! It's all because of you that I'm like this. For your own desires, you created a terrible disaster and caused my brother and husband to die on the battlefield. I curse you to die a horrible death. Before you die, you'll be tortured. After you die, you'll go to the 18th level of hell and never be reincarnated. After saying that, she crashed into a tree and died. Gong Yimo still remembered that she looked at her coldly the whole time. She watched her die without any emotion in her eyes. However, the coarse reins in her hands almost broke. Gong Che heard her purposely use a sharp voice and a resentful tone to say the woman's curse before she died. In the darkness, he vaguely saw Gong Yimo smiling. That smile sent chills down his spine. Then, she smiled and turned to ask him, "Do you know how scared that girl was?" Gong Yimo stared at him and said softly, "I don't know who it was that spread the rumor that she wanted to rule the world. The imperial court ordered her to return to the court several times. Why did she retreat when victory was right in front of her? The opportunity was fleeting. She disobeyed time and time again and finally confirmed the rumor. She was afraid of killing people, but she couldn't show it because she was a general who charged and broke through the enemy lines. She wanted to find someone to talk about her fear, but those people looked at her with fear and vigilance. So, the fear accumulated and she woke up from her dreams every night. Now that he thought about it, it was all a conspiracy. They knew that she wouldn't retreat, so they deliberately did this to smear her name and confirm her evil reputation. What a mocking reality. Don't say any more. The truth was right in front of him, but Gong Che suddenly didn't have the courage to reveal it. He suddenly didn't want to know. He retreated. Why don't you say it? Don't you want to know? Gong Yimo sat beside him and said with a playful tone. Gong Che's voice was trembling slightly. This has nothing to do with me. Why should I know? Wasn't this just a story? Why would he be afraid? Gong Yimo nodded. You're right. She hugged her knees and looked at the light. None of this has anything to do with you. You've never guarded against me, feared me, schemed against me, made me a mere figurehead, or wronged me. She smiled. But I experienced all of this personally in my previous life. The ancients said that a golden millet dream is a lifetime. I woke up in such a dream and faced you with a body full of scars. Were you afraid? Gong Che. When Gong Che heard her chilly voice, he suddenly panicked. He explained anxiously, it's not real. It's just a dream. You were too afraid of the danger caused by the explosion, so you had such a dream. How could he hurt her like he did in her dream? Impossible. Gong Yimo chuckled. Are you dreaming? She blinked and her red lips curled up slightly when she saw Gong Che's panic. Chapter 595. I know that you have a hidden disease that was cured with the water cloud grass. I know that when you are aroused, your eyes will turn red. I even know that you have a birthmark on your inner thigh. It wasn't obvious when you were young and only appeared after you were 10 years old. Even your mother doesn't know about it. Gong Che's heart suddenly turned cold. I know that your favorite color is sapphire blue, but you never wear it because it makes your appearance too delicate and makes you look less dignified. I know that you hate sweets the most, but you don't say it because as the crown prince, your likes and dislikes cannot be known to others. I know that you were mischievous when you were young and cut the beard of the Grand Tutor. I also know that the day the Empress hit you for the first time and hugged you while crying and that the day your mind suddenly changed was your 7th birthday. Gong Che's heart became heavier and heavier. All these, he didn't tell Moa. Do you still think that this is a dream? The heavens took pity on me and gave me a chance to start over. So, even though I was betrayed by you, my heart was broken, and I was tortured to death, I didn't take revenge on any of you. Because the heavens gave me a chance, I gave you a chance. Gong Che found his voice after a while. In the previous life, I hurt you, but Gong Dai killed you. Why did you choose him and not me? He anxiously pulled Gong Yimo's hand. In the darkness, his eyes were shining. You should at least give me a chance to redeem myself. I promise that I will never treat you like that in this life. Give me a chance to redeem myself, okay? Aren't they husband and wife? Gong Yimo took a deep breath. Gong Dai, I didn't want to agree to him at first, but compared to you, he is very good. Gong Che's excited expression suddenly froze. I gave the world to him, and he gave me an even bigger world in return. But I gave the world to you, and after you got it, you trampled on me and chased me away. In this life, you are very good, so I gave you power and status, good reputation, money and business, and everything you wanted in the previous life. But I'm sorry, I can't give you any more feelings. Just like how you didn't trust me in my previous life, I don't trust you now. Gong Yimo slowly got up, and Gong Che's hand could no longer hold on to her, so he weakly let go. The cause of your past life, the effect of your present life. I sympathize with you very much, and I am also very surprised that you are different from your previous life. However, a missed opportunity is a missed opportunity. You can choose to blame the heavens and others, or you can hate me. If you can't make it in both lives, then I have nothing to say. Her expression could not be seen clearly, but her words were like icicles. Moa, she had never said such serious words before. Gong Che panicked. Was he really such a useless person? Gong Yimo's expression was cold as she said softly, with your personality, you won't be able to become an emperor, but you'll be a very good emperor. I've always believed that in my 2 lives. It's just that you've disappointed me so far. Gong Che's mind was in a mess, and his chest was sore and in so much pain that he wished he was dead. However, all of these were not as serious as her words of disappointment. His heart ached, and he said almost subconsciously, I can do it. He slowly got up and firmly said to her, I really can. Moa, don't be disappointed, okay? I'm sorry. Gong Yimo sighed, you didn't do anything wrong to me. You shouldn't be apologizing to me. Speaking of which, she had never really treated Gong Che as an equal, because she could never let go of the emotional trauma from her previous life. But since things had already come to this, there was no point in saying more. You said that we've been husband and wife for 10 years. Gong Che's voice was slightly choked. 12 years. Gong Yimo calmly corrected him. She married him at 18, took off the Empress's phoenix crown at 30, a total of 12 years. Gong Che suddenly closed his eyes. If that's the case, I actually feel that my wish is fulfilled, he said with a trembling voice, and in the end, he lowered his head and bowed to her. Gong Yimo did not want to hear any more words of apology from him. This was very good. She married Gong Dai, and then buried with the emperor. This was very good. Gong Yimo turned to leave, but Gong Che did not raise his head. It was as if he had turned into a stone statue. When she went out, the sun was somewhat glaring. Under the strong light, she saw Gong Dai dressed in black. He had been waiting for her, and he trusted her, so he did not eavesdrop on their conversation. Gong Yimo smiled and skipped over. Gong Dai, are you waiting for me to eat? Gong Dai smiled dotingly. He felt that his royal sister seemed to be getting more and more coquettish. It's still early for dinner, I'll bring you to a place. Gong Yimo originally thought that it would be some romantic place, but she did not expect that Gong Dai would actually bring her to Jiao prison. The torture instruments on both sides were shining, but Gong Yimo could smell the scent of blood on them. When she thought of how it would feel on a person's body, she could not help but tremble. Gong Dai noticed and thought that she was cold, so he hurriedly ordered someone to put a cloak on her. The weather was getting colder, and it was almost winter. Gong Yimo's heart warmed, and her eyes sparkled like little stars as she said softly, Gong Dai, you're so nice. Gong Dai could not help but smile again. His somewhat cold handsome face was slightly red. No one knew that he was also a little shy. No one could see him like this. However, Gong Yimo could still see the tiredness, forbearance, and anxiety under his smile. She knew that the other party was definitely worried about her, and could not help but act coquettishly, coaxing Gong Dai to smile. When they reached the deepest part of the prison, Gong Yimo finally understood what Gong Dai wanted her to see. Shui Wu 11 was actually locked up here, and there were 2 other Snow Clan members, but they were all locked up separately. Gong Yimo sighed inwardly. It seemed that Gong Dai was testing the relationship between the Jiyu poison and the holy stone. No wonder he wanted the holy stone that she buried under the tree. He wanted to save her wholeheartedly. Gong Yimo's eyes dimmed. Shui Wu 11 had completely turned into a crazy woman. When she went crazy, she was like a mad dog, but when she was calm, she was like a venomous snake. Gong Dai stood outside the prison, staring at Shui Wu 11, his mind working quickly. Shui Se wanted to control the royal sister, so he tried several times. The first time, he sent a holy stone to the royal sister. Because the royal sister's body contained the holy stone could affect her, but it could not control her. Shui Se realized that the holy stone would not work on the royal sister, so he wanted to poison the royal sister, increasing the holy stone's composition in the royal sister's body, and then use the holy stone to control her. After the poison failed, Shui Se directly targeted the stone heart, thinking that the stone heart could help him control the royal sister. After all, the stone heart had appeared together with the royal sister. However, the stone heart was in his hands. How could a strange thing control a person? He had been studying this for a long time. If he had a way to control the royal sister, even if the Jiyu poison could not be cured, there was nothing to be afraid of. Gong Yimo looked at Shui Wu 11 curiously. She did not know if Qiu Zhongchan was dead or not, but even if he was not, it would be difficult for him to recover from his injuries. Otherwise, it would be impossible for him to not come to them. Chapter 596. This Xue Wu 11 looked cold, just like an assassin. She wondered what Qiu Zhongchan liked about her. Gong Yimo sighed. She still had the time to think about others when she couldn't even protect herself now. Only Xue Se knew how to use the holy stone to control a lunatic who was poisoned, but he wouldn't tell her. Moreover, Xue Se was only guessing that Shishin could control her. They didn't know how to use it and they couldn't be sure of the results. As for her, she didn't have much time left, because reality proved that every time Xue Wu 11 lost her rationality, she would lose some of her rationality. So Gong Yimo was really afraid. She was afraid that if there was one more time, she would stab her hand into Gong Dai's heart in her madness. Just thinking about that scene made Gong Yimo's heart tremble. She had the urge to strangle herself to death right now. Gong Dai didn't seem to feel anything. "Royal sister." He suddenly called her. Gong Yimo was stunned and quickly looked over. Gong Dai couldn't help but smile. "Royal sister, I still haven't figured out the connection between the Jiyu poison and the holy stone. How can I use a stone to control a poisoned person? You're the smartest, help me think about it." Gong Yimo saw that although he was smiling, the depression in his eyes was getting heavier and heavier. She couldn't help but worry. Because she agreed to be buried with the emperor, her heart felt lighter. So she looked quite relaxed. But Gong Dai was different. He didn't give up on any hope. He was afraid of being disappointed. Bad news came one after another. Time was tight, so all his nerves were tense. But he was still afraid that she would be worried, so he pretended to be relaxed in front of her to make her heart ache. Suddenly, something flashed past Gong Yimo's mind. She said softly, "Gong Dai, Xue Se said that this thing is called a voice transmission stone. Maybe it's the literal meaning?" Seeing Gong Dai looking at her in confusion, because in Gong Dai's mind, there was no concept of electric signals. But Gong Yimo suddenly had a strange idea. If this so-called voice transmission stone was like a mobile phone and could transmit information, then having a voice transmission stone would definitely not be enough. In between, they would need something else to act as a signal medium. Gong Yimo thought about this principle and asked with uncertainty, "You said that humans would faint after eating the holy stone powder. Then, what about animals?" The two of them looked at each other at the same time and immediately thought of something. "Monkey." Gong Dai immediately sent someone to bring Monkey, who was locked up in Taiji Palace. If this stone really needed animals to make sounds, then everything could be explained. Back then, Xue Se had thought that her body already had stone powder in it because of her mother. Therefore, he tried to use this holy stone to see if he could directly control her. Later, when he realized that it wouldn't work, he changed his strategy and wanted to use Jiyu poison. If all her conjectures were correct, perhaps even if she had not met the monkey, Snow would have sent the monkey to her. After all, the monkey was so human-like and understood orders. After she was poisoned, Xue Se would let the monkey eat the holy stone and use the monkey to control her. It was a pity that Xue Se's plan had failed one after another and he had placed all his hopes on Stoneheart. Of course, all these were just conjectures. Whether Xue Se really had such intentions, they would know after trying. Monkey was quickly brought over. When it saw Gong Dai, it was a little afraid. When it saw Gong Yimo, it bared its fangs and brandished its claws. Gong Yimo did not stand on ceremony and directly stuffed the stone into its mouth, and it seemed to know what it was and swallowed it without any resistance. After waiting for a long time, Monkey did not move. However, its eyes were open and it did not fall asleep. Suddenly, it opened its mouth wide. A piercing cry came from its mouth and Gong Yimo hurriedly covered her head and retreated. On the other side, Xue Wu 11 had already gone crazy. Under the stimulation of the sound, it repeatedly hit the iron bars. It seemed to want to get out. Seeing this, Gong Dai coldly pointed his sword at Monkey. "Shut up." His murderous aura made Monkey shut up immediately. Then, Gong Dai's subordinates stuffed its mouth. However, Xue Wu 11 was still in a frenzy and could not control itself. Gong Yimo covered her head and took a deep breath. When the cry stopped, she woke up. She did not show any signs of being controlled like Shui Wu 11. It turned out that the stone could really transmit sound. However, the sound that was transmitted could only be heard by those who were poisoned. "How are you?" Gong Dai asked her anxiously. With a wave of his hand, Monkey's mouth was stuffed. Gong Yimo shook her head. She was awake but still a little dizzy. "I'm fine, she said uncertainly, "Snow doesn't seem to be dead." When the monkey's scream reached my head, it seemed to have turned into the word "save me." Also, I had a hallucination just now. I felt that there was a very important person there, waiting for me to save her. Gong Dai's eyes turned cold. "Don't worry, I'll send someone to burn down hopeless forests. When the time came, the so-called treasure would also be buried in the sea of fire." "Don't!" Gong Yimo hurriedly pulled him back. With such a big forest, who knew how many villages would be destroyed if the fire went down? "Let's try Stoneheart." She understood, it should be possible as long as it's an animal. However, that monkey is spiritual and can be controlled. That's why Shui Se values it so much. Gong Dai nodded. He was looking forward to it. In their minds, Stoneheart was definitely of a higher level than the Holy Stone. Perhaps it was like what Shui Se thought. Stoneheart could control Royal Sister? Gong Dai was delighted. The haze of the past few days seemed to have dissipated. If Stoneheart could control Royal Sister, then Royal Sister would still be safe. Those people could forget about breaking them apart. With this kind of hope, Gong Dai got someone to remove the cloth from Monkey's mouth. Once the cloth was removed, Monkey cried out again. Its eyes were filled with fear. It was afraid that Gong Dai would kill it because of this. However, it could not control itself because someone else was controlling it. Indeed, Shui Se was not dead. Furthermore, he could control it from such a long distance. At that moment, Gong Dai held Stoneheart and kissed it gently. Then he said, "Berserk." Once his voice fell, Monkey's cry immediately changed. Shui Wu 11, who received the voice, only felt the scene in front of her changed. Those nightmares that she did not want to face appeared again. They stimulated her again and again. She could not get rid of this illusion. Her emotions immediately went berserk. Gong Yimo heard the cry and her head hurt even more. Although Gong Dai felt sorry for her, in order to test whether Stoneheart could control her, he could only let her suffer. However, Shui Wu 11 was even more miserable. Gong Dai's command directly overpowered Shui Se's cry for help. She was tortured by the illusion in her head. Her body felt like it was going to explode. In the short cry of Monkey, there was no target to attack. She could only continue to harm herself to relieve the pain. Gong Dai saw the effect and then looked at Gong Yimo, who was having a headache. He frowned. In the end, he saw that Gong Yimo did not show any signs of going berserk. His heart sank. Maybe there is another way. However, she knew that she was just deceiving herself. Gong Ju wanted to kill. He wanted to cut the Snow Clan's people into pieces. The time it took for the poison to flare up would only get shorter and shorter. He had to find the antidote before his sister's next flare-up. Otherwise, the situation would only get worse. So he didn't have time to go crazy. He wished he could split every second into two halves. Even if he was exhausted, he couldn't stop. It was as if there was a beast chasing after him. He couldn't give up. He couldn't stop. Gong Yimo's heart ached for him. She couldn't help but hug Gong Dai tightly. Everyone immediately moved away, allowing them to hug each other quietly in the dungeon. After a long time, Gong Dai finally calmed down, but his entire person was indescribably dispirited. What to do? He lightly nuzzled her neck as his hoarse voice reverberated. What could he do to cure the poison? He couldn't think of a way. He had tried all the medicines that could be used on Shui Wu Shi, but none of them had any effect. Nothing could cure the GU poison. No matter how many medicines were fed, Shui Wu Shi would still go crazy. And it was more frequent each time. After many attempts, he could only place his last hope on the Stone Heart. The one who started the trouble should end it. He really hoped that the Stone Heart could solve all of this. But he didn't expect that even if they figured out how to use it and could control Shui Wu Shi, They couldn't control the royal sister. What should he do? What else could he do? Gong Dai hadn't asked this question for many years. In the past, when he encountered problems, it was others who asked him what to do. No matter how difficult it was, he could think of a way. But at this moment, he couldn't think of any way. Gong Yimo hugged him and softly comforted him. It's okay. Nothing will happen. How could nothing happen? Once she acted up again, would he really have to build a sealed dungeon to lock her up? If the poison couldn't be cured in her lifetime, would she be locked up for life? Even if Gong Dai was willing, those people wouldn't agree. Gong Yimo's strength made them afraid. After all, it wasn't every time there were 20,000 people sent out to encircle her. It wasn't every time there was someone like Changshi at the front. If royal sister acted up again, he was afraid that everyone in the world would beg him to kill her. He really didn't have the time. Gong Yimo had already made up her mind. If she still had a glimmer of hope earlier, now she was only left with despair. She couldn't bear to see Gong Dai sad. If her existence really became a source of trouble, she was willing to use her death to ensure the safety of her beloved. Nothing will happen. Gong Yimo hugged Gong Dai and told him over and over again. Chapter 598. Gong Dai lowered his gaze and stared at her without blinking. You're most afraid of killing people for no reason. You're most afraid of becoming an executioner in the eyes of the world. You're most afraid of becoming a burden to me. I know all these. Gong Yimo choked and could not refute him. Gong Dai continued, when I was young, you taught me psychological tactics and even told me that a person's heart can be sick. You even gave me a few examples. One of them had a psychological illness that I felt was very similar to yours. Gong Yimo blinked and looked at him. Suddenly, she felt uneasy. She taught him psychological tactics so that when he grew up, he would be more at home when dealing with people. She did not expect him to use it all on her. I'm not sick, she said without much confidence. You are. Gong Dai stared at her fiercely. Under his unreserved pressure, the murderous aura that was similar to that of the Grand Regent in her previous life made Gong Yimo want to escape. There's a condition called post-traumatic stress disorder. It's exactly what you're experiencing. In your heart, there's a nightmare. If you don't touch that nightmare, you'll be fine. But once you touch it, you'll remember a lot of things that you shouldn't remember. You'll be depressed and lose your will to fight. You'll even commit suicide. Gong Dai tried hard to recall every word that she said back then. He drew inferences and speculated, but Gong Yimo did not have any changes that could hide from his wise eyes. When his hand touched her hair again, Gong Yimo felt that she had nothing to hide in front of him. This kind of temptation really made her want to escape. She heard him say, baby, after killing those innocent people and Changshi, you'll most likely become an executioner without any sense of reason. That's your biggest fear, right? His voice was dreamy and illusory. You're so eager for everyone to live well, as if you're compensating for something. Although I don't know the reason, I won't force you. But now, do you want to leave me? The faint danger under that gentleness made Gong Dai's calm face have a devilish beauty. It was impactful, and it made Gong Yimo's heart pound fiercely against her chest. Under his pressure, it was as if something was beginning to awaken. Did she do something wrong? She was such a dangerous person, shouldn't she die? If she continued to live, what if she was used by someone who hid even deeper, and turned into a mindless butcher? Rivers of blood and corpses. She was afraid that the nightmare would repeat itself. She was even more afraid that she would drag Gong Dai down with her. She was afraid that he, who was clean in this life, would also become a terrifying person. She was so flustered. She was scared, so scared. Royal sister, answer me. Are you going to leave me? When Gong Dai raised his voice, he did not expect to scare Gong Yimo to tears. She was already on the verge of a nervous breakdown. In her previous life, the state of mind before her death once again enveloped her. She felt that she had done nothing wrong, but after being yelled at by Gong Dai, she felt guilty and broke down into tears. She was even trembling all over. Gong Dai was caught off guard. Bad guy. What right do you have to yell at me? I didn't do anything wrong. Gong Yimo wiped her tears as she stared at him with reddened eyes. Gong Dai's heart softened when he saw her crying, but he was also angered to death by her word. So you really want to leave me? He held her waist tightly and stared back at her fiercely. Who gave you the guts? Gong Yimo was afraid, but she did not want to be outdone and raised her head. Gong Dai, I'm your sister. Who gave you the guts to yell at me like that? Gong Dai narrowed his eyes. But you're also my woman. After saying that, he kissed those little lips that he loved and hated at the same time. Gong Yimo resisted with all her might. After being exposed to Gong Dai's naked analysis of her thoughts, she felt an inexplicable anger after being scared. However, their martial arts skills were on par, and Gong Dai's physical strength was several times stronger than hers. She kept trying to break free, but Gong Dai pressed her against the iron bars of an empty cell. He bit her lips and refused to let go. This was a matter of principle, and he had to teach her a lesson. He could not be soft-hearted. Gong Yimo felt that she could not breathe. Gradually, her resistance became weaker and weaker. The pain from her lips made her cry and curse at the same time. Gong Dai, you're so annoying. You. Me. She finally managed to catch her breath, but her lips were sealed again. Gong Dai's gaze became deeper and deeper. That scorching body temperature and his unyielding dominance seemed to melt her. Gong Yimo finally turned her head and broke free from him. Bird. Me. Could he wait for her to finish cursing before kissing her? Gong Yimo's eyes were spitting fire. However, slowly, Gong Dai's kiss became gentler. That gentleness seemed to be able to soothe all of her fear, panic, and inexplicable anger. Gong Yimo gradually calmed down and kissed him back. It was as if she was absorbing energy from him. Gong Dai closed his eyes and kissed her so sweetly. However, in the end, that sweetness suddenly turned bitter, causing a trace of pain to appear on his cold and handsome face. His hand grabbed Gong Yimo's waist tightly. His strength was so great that it was as if he wanted to embed her into his body. He let go of her red and swollen lips and leaned against her forehead as he panted. Don't leave me. His cold and unique voice had a trace of sourness that seemed to entangle into her bones. It turned into silk threads and permeated into her limbs and bones. That sourness gradually deepened, causing her to suddenly feel unbearable heartache. Only by hugging him did she have the strength to stand. She wanted to say, I don't want to leave you. But, Momo, Gong Dai opened his eyes and lowered his head to look at her. His brows were slightly furrowed, but he was firm as he said each word clearly. I know that the current situation is very difficult for you. I also know that you're just afraid of hurting me. You're afraid that you'll become an irrational lunatic in the end. But, his voice trembled as he grabbed her hand tightly and placed it on his chest. But you've wanted me to believe you since we were young. Can't you believe me? I promise that no matter what, I won't let you become like that. I'll definitely not be killed by you. I believe in you. Can you believe in me too? Gong Yimo blinked. She couldn't retract her hand that was grabbed by him. It was as if she was being held tightly by someone and had no way to escape. Under Gong Dai's scorching gaze, Gong Yimo, who had nowhere to retreat, felt her psychological defenses crumbling inch by inch. After a while, she trembled as she spoke of the fear in her heart. This was also the first time she had expressed her fear to an outsider. I'm afraid. She was afraid. This had nothing to do with whether she believed in him or not. It was only because she loved him that she didn't want to hurt him at all. As she thought of this, she almost pleaded, let me go. I don't want to hurt you. Please. Gong Dai held her hand tightly. He wouldn't budge an inch. Don't leave me. He looked at her lovingly. Even if it's for me, can you stay? Gong Yimo pouted. I'm really afraid. Gong Dai hugged her gently. Don't be afraid. No matter what happened in the past, you already have me. I'll protect you. But if you leave, I'll have nothing left. Chapter 599. He said that without her, he would have nothing. This sentence made Gong Yimo's heart warm up. She felt that she was needed. She was not a burden, she was also needed. All right. I won't leave you. Gong Yimo hugged him and said softly. But her heart was filled with pain. She could only die, she could not leave. The emperor would not let her go. They could not think of a solution. Her existence was a threat. If she went back on her words now, she would only be forcing the emperor to use force. For the stability of the country, before he died, he would definitely take her with him. This was the reality. But Gong Dai was overjoyed when he heard this. Royal sister would not lie. If she said she would not leave, then she would not leave. In his excitement, he hugged Gong Yimo and kissed her several times. He pulled himself together again. If the stone heart could not work, then so be it. He directly handed the stone heart to Gong Yimo. Although she was not controlled by the holy stone, but when she heard the sound, she would still have a headache. So handing it to her was considered as keeping it for self-protection. After all, he did not know if there were other people behind the scenes other than Snow. In the next few days, Gong Dai was busy. Gong Yimo told him that after this incident, Gong Che had already given up. Gong Dai secretly observed and found that every time royal sister went to accompany imperial father, Gong Che was very well behaved and even avoided her. Only then did he give up. But he still kept a close eye on Gong Che, afraid that he would suddenly go crazy. Moreover, Gong Dai's eyes flashed with a murderous intent. He had already thought it through. Once he found a way to save royal sister, he would kill Gong Che, this eyesore. The previous incident had seriously touched his reverse scale. He did not want to tolerate it anymore. But now, the emperor was about to die. If he killed Gong Che, it would only make him busy. He would let Gong Che live for a few more days. Gong Yimo accompanied the emperor every day and talked to him, but he was still losing weight at a speed visible to the naked eye. His bones were even more obvious, and it was a ghastly sight. Gong Cheng couldn't eat fat, but he was consuming fat every day. He would die of weakness. No matter how many elixirs he had, it would be useless. This process of death was comparable to death by 1,000 cuts. On this day, Gong Yimo had a dream. The dream was so heavy that when she arrived at Chaoyang Hall, she was still feeling depressed. Now, Gong Cheng was very weak. He was still alive because he refused to die. He said that he would endure until Gong Yimo got married, and her wedding day was tomorrow. After tomorrow, when Gong Cheng died, the imperial edict would be announced to the world that she would be buried with the emperor. Although the emperor had basically handed over most of his power, he was still the emperor. Naturally, there would be people who would strictly abide by his edicts. Gong Yimo also didn't want to change anything. Although she didn't want Gong Dai to be sad, she didn't want to hurt him even more. The way Gong Dai loved her was to sacrifice everything. The way she loved Gong Dai was to sacrifice her life. When Gong Cheng saw Gong Yimo coming, he blinked weakly. Gong Yimo helped him up. His hands and feet began to swell. One was thick and the other was thin. When she helped Gong Cheng up, she pressed on his swollen hand. It didn't move for a long time. In a sense, this body was already dead. It was just hanging on by a breath. These days, the palace was very lively. His children who were far away in the fief all came back. They also shed a few tears in front of his bed. They were all waiting for the day he breathed his last. They came back to observe filial piety and meet the new emperor. Gong Yimo had never experienced the feeling of waiting for death. But just thinking about it, she knew it wasn't good. Who would be willing to die? Moreover, with this kind of status, this kind of character, waiting for death was too cowardly for him. Gong Yimo couldn't help but recall the first time she saw him. He was vigorous and fierce, wearing a dragon robe. He was surrounded by imperial concubines and ministers when he came to the cold palace. Wearing exquisite dragon boots, his feet stepped into the dark and moldy cold palace. He looked so out of place. He was noble and imposing. Even at night, even if there were only palace lanterns around him, his figure still seemed to be glowing. He was awe-inspiring and inviolable. He was the emperor who opened up the territory on horseback. He was also the absurd emperor of the imperial harem. He was the swift and decisive commander in the imperial court. He was also the father of more than 30 children. But now, in just a few years, he was defeated. Gong Yimo clearly remembered that he always had a head of black hair. But she didn't know when. His hair had already turned white. When did all this happen? Gong Yimo sighed. She suddenly felt that she was not a good daughter. For her ambitions and ideals, she moved between the 4 countries, but there were few days left to accompany him. If she could do it all over again, she would spend more time with him. She always wanted a father like Gong Cheng, but in the end, she didn't cherish it. She wanted to take him to ride a horse and travel with him. They had agreed to go to Jiangnan. The dragon boat was ready. This time, she didn't blow up the boat, but he couldn't go to Jiangnan. Some opportunities were fleeting. Some people, walking and walking, reached the end. Gong Yimo endured the bitterness. Just as she was about to speak, she felt a headache. Gong Cheng opened his eyes and looked at her quietly. She quickly loosened her eyebrows and forced a smile. It's okay. This is not a sign of madness. She thought that perhaps it was the after-effect of experimenting with Stoneheart a few days ago. She often had headaches recently. The pain was as if someone was beating her head with a stone. Gong Cheng was not at ease. It just so happened that the imperial physician hadn't left yet. He glanced at the imperial physician. The imperial physician quickly stepped forward and said with some embarrassment, "Princess, this is a serious matter. This humble official will take your pulse." Gong Yimo was helpless, but she still stretched out her hand. The last time her poison broke out, the emperor used 20,000 people to suppress her. It was impossible to hide the fact that the emperor used 20,000 people to suppress her. These people in the palace were even more frightened when they saw her. So she let the other party take her pulse to make them feel at ease. The old imperial physician frowned. After taking the pulse carefully, he glanced at the emperor and said in a low voice, "Princess, there's something wrong with your body. I can feel a wave of energy flowing through your body. Could it be that it's the GU poison?" Gong Yimo lowered her head. It's not a problem. She felt that it was impossible for the poison to break out again so soon. Besides, she had already decided to be buried with him. As long as tomorrow, after the wedding, nothing would matter. But she didn't understand her body, but the imperial physician did. The emperor suddenly said, water." Gong Yimo quickly went to pour water for him. As soon as she left, the imperial physician said a few words to the emperor with a worried frown. Obviously, Gong Yimo's body was more serious than what he said before. The emperor didn't have any reaction when he heard it. He just waved his hand and dismissed him. At this time, Gong Yimo walked in and carefully served the emperor water. At this time, Gong Cheng was already very weak. It was very strenuous for him to drink water. He drank from a small cup several times but still couldn't finish it. Chapter 600. Gong Yimo couldn't bear it and asked softly after he finished drinking, "Do you want more?" Gong Cheng shook his head, and Gong Yimo sat down beside him. In the past, Gong Yimo would tell him some interesting news at this time, and today was no exception. She looked at his pale and colorless face, which had lost the support of fat, and his big and scary eyes. Her heart moved, but the words were already out of her mouth. "Imperial father, I dreamed of you last night." Gong Yimo smiled, and Gong Cheng seemed to be interested. He glanced at her and motioned for her to continue. Recalling the dream, it was too real. She dreamed that Gong Cheng looked at her with a sad face and said that he couldn't let her go, so seeing that Gong Cheng was interested, she subconsciously said it. "I dreamed of you crying." After saying it, she wanted to bite off her tongue. What the hell was she talking about? Gong Cheng was the emperor. He had been the emperor for decades. He was high and mighty, tough and overbearing. How could he have such a fragile side like in her dream? But before she could say anything to remedy it, she looked at Gong Cheng lying on the bed and really cried. Big drops of tears fell down. He looked at Gong Yimo quietly, and all his grief seemed to melt into his tears. This kind of silent crying was the most uncomfortable. When she thought that the fierce emperor in the past also had such a fragile day, Gong Yimo couldn't help but sniffle. She didn't want to cry, so she wiped his tears and apologized. "Imperial father, don't cry. I said the wrong thing." It was obviously comforting words, but Gong Cheng's tears fell even more fiercely. Seeing him like this, Gong Yimo couldn't help but cry. Sometimes people were really fragile. No matter how much power and status they had, it was the same in the face of death. Open your hands. What you can't bring with you when you're born, you can't take it away when you die. It was already very uncomfortable to be separated by life and death, not to mention watching a man of iron cry, a hero past his prime. Gong Yimo gently pulled Gong Cheng's hand. Don't cry. Are you worried about Dai Yu state? Gong Cheng raised his tearful eyes and looked at her like a child. His expression made her see innocence. Gong Yimo smiled through her tears and said, Brother Crown Prince is much better now. Furthermore, he has begun to personally govern the country for the past 2 days. Furthermore, there is still Gong Dai. He can be considered to have inherited all of my knowledge. With them around, the Dai Yu state will not fall into chaos. Gong Cheng closed his eyes as tears rolled down his cheeks. It was as if he wanted to shed all the tears in his life. When his father died, he didn't cry. When Shuilian died, he didn't cry. When his son died, he didn't cry either. But he felt terrible. He was upset, but he couldn't cry. He was the emperor, the ruler of Dai Yu state. However, as he waited for his death, he felt as if he had lived a long life. He didn't want to endure any longer in his final days. Now, he wanted to shed all the tears he should have shed in his life, to be a coward for once. Gong Yimo said when he saw the emperor's grief. Father, are you worried that if I die, Gong Dai will rebel? Gong Yimo said softly, he won't. I know him. If I'm alive, he might turn the world upside down to find me. But if I'm dead, he will accept reality. He is strong and responsible. It's just that if I'm alive, he will value his responsibility to me more. Gong Cheng suddenly opened his eyes. His voice was hoarse. Are you afraid? I want you to die. Are you afraid? Gong Yimo froze for a moment and then smiled bitterly. What's the point of being afraid? In my situation, if I don't die, I will only be a burden to others. She held the emperor's hand tightly and said seriously, I'll accompany Imperial Father on this last part of the journey. All right. Gong Cheng smiled and finally stopped crying. It's my fortune to have such a daughter. Dai Yu state's fortune. He pursed his lips with great effort. Moa, the Imperial Edict is under the bed, in the secret compartment, Imperial Edict. Gong Yimo suspiciously opened the secret compartment and saw the Imperial Edict that she personally wrote. But strangely, there was another Imperial Edict next to her Imperial Edict. She took it in her hand and curiously opened it. But when she saw the content, she was a bit stunned. Because this Imperial Edict actually wrote her identity. It admitted that Shuilian was pregnant and married him. It also admitted that she, Gong Yimo, is not his child. Why? Isn't this Imperial Edict a bit redundant? She was going to be buried with him. Why did the emperor admit this on his last day? Wouldn't the whole world know that he, the dignified emperor, actually raised someone else's child? This is the shame of the royal family. Seeing Gong Yimo's little face full of shock, Gong Cheng said weakly, This way, you can marry Gong Dai, perfectly justifiable. Gong Yimo's heart was slightly sour. It turned out that the emperor wanted her to marry Gong Dai in a perfectly justifiable way. So he didn't hesitate to expose this matter to the whole world. Gong Dai and her falling in love, although it was against the rules of etiquette, it didn't violate human relations. Father. Thank you, thank you. At this time, other than thanking him, she had nothing else to say. Gong Yimo couldn't help but hold the Imperial Edict tightly. Being able to have a perfect wedding with Gong Dai, what could make her happier than this? Gong Cheng took the other Imperial Edict from her hand with great effort and suddenly asked, Moa, you once said that as long as you are alive, this world will not be in chaos. Is that true? Gong Yimo only thought that he had heard the imperial physician's words before and was afraid that she would make a mistake on such an important day like tomorrow. So, she said in a strict voice, Father, I have made an oath since I was young. As long as I am alive, the world will not be in chaos. She didn't allow it. For this reason, she made the people of the other 3 countries sign 100 years of peace. Even if she died, if nothing unexpected happened, There would be 100 years of peace. Gong Cheng stared at her without blinking and suddenly revealed a bright smile. He opened his mouth, and one could vaguely see the domineering appearance of the past. He proudly praised her. Good. You are worthy of being my child. At that moment, his eyes seemed to turn from turbid to sharp and bright. He praised again. You are worthy of being the child that I have valued since you were young. Moa, you are really like me. Actually, in my heart, you have always been my pride. Gong Yimo couldn't help but choke with sobs. She suddenly felt that to be able to get Gong Cheng's affirmation, she could die without regrets. But the emperor's expression just became a little more spirited, and he became dispirited again. He waved his hand at Gong Yimo. Go. I am tired. When he said this sentence, there was a sense of powerlessness from the inside out, revealing a deep sense of weakness and exhaustion. Gong Yimo readily accepted his good advice. She looked at him gratefully and retreated. Holding the imperial edict, she was suddenly very eager to tell Gong Ju about this matter. She would finally be able to marry him in a proper way. After Gong Yimo left, Gong Cheng suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood, and his face turned ashen. Chapter 601. As soon as he rang the bell, a palace servant hurried to the bedside and knelt down respectfully. Your Majesty, he was very young and was Changshi's adopted son. He was clever and loyal, so the emperor liked him very much. Help me up. The man quickly stepped forward to help the emperor up, and then helped him to sit in front of the imperial table according to the emperor's request. The little eunuch didn't say anything superfluous. The emperor didn't have much time left. No one knew better than them, so they wouldn't stop him from doing whatever he wanted. Looking at the imperial table in front of him, Emperor Cheng was in a trance. He used to review memorials here, practice calligraphy here, and read books here. His father had this imperial table when he was still alive. Now that he thought about it, it had actually lived for 2 generations and witnessed 2 generations of emperors. I want to write an imperial edict. Hearing the emperor's order, the little eunuch quickly spread out the imperial edict, but he felt a little strange because the emperor had arranged everything a few days ago. Why did he want to write an imperial edict today? But he didn't ask, and respectfully handed the cinnabar brush to the emperor. He didn't know how to read, so he naturally didn't know that this was an imperial edict. Emperor Cheng actually wrote an imperial edict, saying that if he died, he would allow Gong Dai to get married first, and then arrange the funeral. Because he already felt that this was his final radiance, he was going to die. Then, he solemnly stamped the imperial jade seal, and under the little eunuch's shocked eyes, his hands trembled as he burned the imperial edict. The little eunuch was shocked. He knew the contents of the imperial edict. After his adoptive father died, he had been accompanying the emperor like a shadow. He knew everything, including what the imperial physician said just now. He said that the princess's breath was unstable, but the princess didn't seem to notice. He also said that the princess was pregnant. So, was this the reason why the emperor changed his mind? In the fire, the light in Emperor Cheng's eyes became dimmer and dimmer. The imperial edict burned little by little, and in the end, he found that he was relieved. From the emperor's point of view, Gong Yimo must die, but from the father's point of view, even if his children made a monstrous mistake, no matter how angry he would still forgive and not give up on her. He had been an emperor his whole life. Before he died, could he be willful for once and be a father for once? It was a pity that he couldn't see the child in Moa's belly. Would it be a princess or a prince? While he was in a trance, he heard the eunuch cry out in surprise. It turned out that he had suddenly spat out large mouthfuls of blood, dyeing his bright yellow inner garment red. Previously, when he was still alive, he was just hanging on by a thread and refused to swallow it. However, when Gong Yimo made the vow just now, his heart ached, but he suddenly felt that he could be at ease. I'm sorry, Moa. Father won't live to see you get married. As a mother, you must be strong. Please remember your vow and overcome all difficulties to survive. I choose to believe you because you are my pride. His Majesty has passed away. A long announcement was made, but Gong Yimo had already left the palace. She seemed to feel something and turned around. Through the window, she saw countless birds flying over the palace wall behind her. Wild geese were flying to the south. Winter was coming. Before she could show the imperial edict in her hand to Gong Dai hurriedly met her. His expression was cold and his brows were furrowed, as if he didn't know how to tell the royal sister about this matter. Gong Yimo got into Gong Dai's carriage and turned towards the palace. "What's wrong?" Gong Yimo asked nervously. Gong Ju touched her hair and whispered to her as softly as possible. "Father has passed away." "What?" She was shocked. "He was clearly fine when I came out. He still. Gong Yimo hugged the imperial edict in her hand and silently hid it in her space. If the emperor died and the edict was issued, she would be buried with him. Then, there was no need to announce the imperial edict in her hand to the world. At that moment, in addition to heartache, she was even more flustered. What should I do? I haven't married Gong Dai yet. I don't want to die. Can I marry him and then be buried with him? Obviously, it was impossible because the emperor's death was a great funeral. Nothing could surpass this matter. Gong Dai had to observe filial piety for 3 years. In this panic, Gong Yimo arrived at the palace again. At this time, Zhaoyang Hall was already bustling with a large group of people. The Empress Dowager, the Empress, the imperial concubines, the princes, and the ministers were probably on their way. The moment she saw the emperor's pale purple face, Gong Yimo suddenly burst into tears. "It's not like this. When I left, the emperor was still smiling and saying a lot. Why did he die when I didn't see him for a while? His eyes and mouth couldn't close because he was too thin, revealing thin slits. His pale purple face was really scary. This is not Father Emperor, no." Gong Dai brought her to kneel beside the bed. "Father Emperor, this son is unfilial and came late." When Gong Dai came, everyone had to make way for him. The crown prince sat beside the emperor's bed with tears in his eyes. It could be seen that the guilt and self-blame in his heart was crazily tormenting him. If it wasn't for him, Father Emperor might have lived for another 20 years. Even if he died, he shouldn't have died in such a cruel way. All of this was his fault. At this time, the ministers came one after another. When they heard the cries in Zhaoyang Hall, they also began to cry. The entire Zhaoyang Hall was shrouded in grief. At this time, the senior officials of 2 dynasties and the first-rank cabinet minister came forward and read the emperor's edict. After his death, Gong Che would succeed the throne. Gong Che didn't seem to feel it. It was the empress who pulled him while crying that he knelt to receive the edict. After reading it, he was lost in thought. At this time, the little eunuch took out the emperor's newly written edict and let the minister read it. There was still Gong Cheng's blood on it. The minister was surprised. When he held it in his hand, he was suddenly shocked. But when he read the content, the grief on his face was instantly replaced by surprise. He looked at Gong Yimo in shock, and then looked at Gong Dai. Gong Yimo had already wiped away her tears at this time. She knew that the edict was about to be read. Her heart was slightly cold. When the moment came, she tightly grasped Gong Dai's hand as a final support. The old minister was stunned for a long time before he read the edict that didn't seem like an imperial edict. Zhen's beloved son, Gong Yimo, will tie the knot tomorrow. Zhen feels that there is not much time left, but I don't want to ruin this good relationship. Therefore, with the marriage first and the funeral later, on the road to the Yellow Springs, there will be joy to send you off, so you won't be lonely. When the minister finished reading, he found that everyone present was stunned. Everyone knew that Gong Dai wanted to prepare for the wedding and marry Gong Yimo. Such an immoral thing. They thought that the emperor was only afraid of Gong Dai's strength and was only half reluctant. They didn't expect that at the end of his life, he would give an edict that didn't involve marriage. Moreover, it was a special wedding. This special honor was simply unprecedented in history. If he wasn't sure that it was the emperor's handwriting, he would have doubted whether it was real. Chapter 602. Gong Yimo was even more shocked. She raised her head and stared at the edict. She finally understood why the emperor gave her the edict. He wanted her to announce to the world at the right time that she was officially married to Gongju. Moreover, he wanted Gongju to protect her. Therefore, he issued a decree that Gongju wouldn't have to mourn for 3 years before marrying her. But that's not right, shouldn't it be? Shouldn't it be a funeral edict? Why did it change? Could it be, after she left, Imperial Father changed his mind? After the shock, Gong Yimo's heart became even more sour. Imperial Father was still soft-hearted. He should have killed her. But when it came down to it, he actually couldn't bear to. He actually went against his lifelong beliefs and risked the world's chaos to let her live. He was really too willful. Gong Yimo cried and laughed. If Emperor Gong was still awake, she didn't know whether she should righteously scold him or thank him. Thank him for believing in her when he was about to die. Gong Dai was even more surprised. His black jade-like eyes widened in disbelief. He had already prepared for mourning, but he still felt a little regretful. Everything was ready, and tomorrow was the wedding. He didn't expect it to be like this. Gong Dai sighed. When he was young, this man was like an unattainable mountain in his heart. Later on, when he grew up, he gradually realized that the mountain was getting shorter. Perhaps, he was getting stronger. He always felt that Gong Cheng didn't like him very much, because he had to work very hard to get what others could easily get. Because his mother killed his most beloved woman, Gong Cheng's attitude towards him was always unpredictable. But at this moment, Gong Dai thanked him. He thanked him for betrothing the world's most precious treasure to him at the last moment of his life. Gong Che came back to his senses and smiled bitterly. He watched Gong Dai receive the edict, then looked at Gong Yimo. He endured the pain and smiled. Congratulations. Gong Dai. You still won. He took a deep breath and didn't look at Gong Yimo anymore. Tomorrow is the day of the wedding. I will take Imperial Father's place to preside over your wedding. Gong Dai looked at him deeply, and then pulled Gong Yimo, who was still in a daze, to bow. Greetings, new emperor. Although he hadn't been crowned yet, Gong Che had received the decree and was now the emperor. Gong Yimo didn't come back to her senses until she knelt down. She didn't have to die, she didn't have to be buried with him. Why did he feel so relaxed? So unknowingly, she was already unwilling to die. She couldn't help but turn her head and look at the cold and handsome man who was helping her up. That's right. With him around, she didn't want to die. If she was selfish, then so be it. Imperial Father believed in her. She would definitely be able to get through this. Definitely. After all, she had made an oath. The emperor's corpse was put away because the emperor had issued a posthumous edict. He had made it clear that the wedding should come first and the funeral should come later. So everyone laughed out of harmony and congratulated Gong Dai. However, they couldn't not prepare for the funeral. This matter fell into the hands of Gong Che. Gong Che and the empress prepared for the national funeral, but they didn't announce the emperor's death first so that the people wouldn't know about it. After the wedding, they would announce the emperor's death. As for the wedding, Gong Dai had already prepared everything. During the process, Gong Yimo didn't have to worry at all. Obviously, it was an unethical thing, but Gong Yimo didn't hear any criticism. Gong Dai had to prepare for the wedding, deal with political affairs, and find a way to cure the poison. He also took care of her emotions like an iron man that never tired. In the carriage, Gong Yimo suddenly sighed. As if a burden had been lifted, she closed her eyes and her body burst with vitality again. If death wasn't a way out, then the only thing she had to do was to live well and not disappoint her Imperial Father's expectations. She also didn't disappoint Gong Dai's efforts. The emperor cared about her and Gong Dai didn't give up on her. What reason did she have not to live well? She decided that after the wedding, she would find a way to cure the poison by herself and share part of Gong Dai's burden. There must be a way. If it really didn't work, she would go to the treasure trove and drink all the blood. Gong Yimo's eyes flashed with a frightening cold light. She who was rejuvenated seemed to have broken away from the 30-year-old empress in her previous life. She finally let go of her worries, as if she was reborn again. Gong Dai saw that she was silent and reached out to hug her to comfort her. It's okay, royal sister. Tomorrow is our big day. Today, let's not be sad. After all, after tomorrow, there are still many things waiting for us to overcome. So today, let's be happy first, okay? He was a little dazed and touched her hair again and again. I really can't believe that I'm going to have you soon. Gong Yimo nodded solemnly. She solemnly wiped away her unshed tears and hugged his waist tightly without letting go. Actually, after crying just now, she wasn't so sad anymore. She had seen too many deaths. To her, when a person died, it was completely gone. You could cry or laugh, but they didn't know. Therefore, after a living person had vented and cried, it was time to face their own life. It wasn't that she didn't love or miss, but she really understood the meaning behind death, which was to live well. Living was the greatest respect for the dead, the longest memory, and the most gratifying answer. And in her heart, she felt that Gong Cheng's death was actually a kind of relief. To a proud person like her, suffering like that was too torturous. Therefore, she encouraged herself along the way and adjusted her emotions. She swore that when she got off the carriage, she would return to her original state of mind, hope, and determination. Soon, they arrived at Qi Manor. It was decorated with lanterns and colored banners, rich and noble. Gong Yimo looked at the familiar yet unfamiliar manor in front of her. The slightly cool air made her heart light and calm. Her heart suddenly rejoiced, and her heart pounded. A kind of power was awakening. She finally smiled, as if the sky had cleared after the rain, and all things were reborn. Gong Dai turned back to help her, but was stunned by her smile. He suddenly felt that his lively royal sister had returned. Gong Yimo looked at their future home, and then glanced at Gong Dai. She raised her chin slightly. Gong Xiaoju. She proudly looked down at him. Carry this princess down. Gong Dai was stunned, and then he really carried her down the carriage. His cold voice softly said, "This subject obeys." He reached out and hugged her waist, and gently lowered her to the ground. That sweet gesture really made others envious. Gong Yimo glanced at the crowd proudly. They bowed their heads and pretended not to see. Gong Yimo whistled again, and squinted at Gong Dai maliciously. "Hey, Gong Xiaoju, this princess suddenly found that you are very good. Come, this princess will give you another chance. Carry this princess inside." Gong Ju wrapped his arms around her waist and gently hugged her. "Yes, my princess." Chapter 603. The people in front of the door stepped aside and didn't dare to look up at the appearance of the prince's slave to his wife. It's really embarrassing. What happened to his domineering attitude? Being called Gong Xiaoju by the princess didn't give him the slightest bit of dignity. But the prince still responded and acted as if he was used to this nickname. It was really unbearable. But no matter how much they complained, everyone was happy. Although it was an eventful time, the princess was poisoned, the emperor died, and a new emperor ascended the throne, everyone was still looking forward to this wedding. No matter how rough the future was, no matter how many people criticized this marriage, as long as the prince could hold the beauty in his arms, nothing else mattered. Everyone was jubilant. After Gong Dai left, they hurriedly arranged the last few corners. Time was too tight, but no matter how urgent it was, this wedding would definitely be unprecedentedly grand. Although the emperor was dead, the emperor's posthumous edict gave special permission to celebrate first and then mourn later. They didn't have to worry about anything, they just had to make arrangement. If they wanted to cry, they could cry during the emperor's funeral the day after tomorrow. But before the wedding banquet, they would definitely send their most sincere blessings to this couple who had finally tied the knot. Gong Yimo was carried by Gong Dai all the way to his room. Gong Yimo was inexplicably shy because she rarely went to Gong Dai's room. The room seemed to have been newly renovated. It was filled with his smell. It was clean and fresh, but also very overbearing. Once she touched it, she couldn't get rid of it. His room was decorated very simply, just like his personality. It was mainly black. Gong Yimo didn't agree with his aesthetic. But it didn't matter. She would definitely correct his hobbies in the future. Gong Dai put her on the bed. Just as he was about to get up, Gong Yimo wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him deeply. Gong Yimo seemed to be addicted to kissing him. She loved his smell too much. It was clean, with a mint fragrance. It was cold, with a burning heat and strength, as if it could melt her. The two of them stood on the bed with her hands on the bed, while the other sat on the bed. She hugged his neck and kissed him deeply. Their ambiguous voices sounded in this space. Her eagerness made Gong Dai somewhat unable to bear it. He quietly raised a hand and tightly pressed the back of her head to deepen their entanglement. She closed her eyes, her eyelashes fluttering. She had a different kind of satisfaction. This fool still doesn't know that he almost lost her. Gong Yimo couldn't help but wonder what her father would have done if he hadn't changed his mind and issued a posthumous edict in front of everyone. Marry. But when she thought about this question, she had already decided to die. Now that she thought about it, it was actually a little scary. She knew that she had a psychological problem. In the last few months of her previous life, her will was gone and she was like a walking corpse. But she didn't expect that in this life, this psychological problem would be solved. Because the Emperor put down everything and chose to believe in her. Because Gong Dai never gave up on her and treated her from beginning to end, she was grateful to these two men, and even more grateful to Gong Dai. So when she kissed him, she couldn't wait to merge into her body. She was able to pull herself together again because she had experienced a lot. But the one who really healed her was Gong Dai. He needed her. She didn't want to die. I love you. Gong Dai. Gong Yimo hugged his neck and kissed his lower lip softly. When it came to expressing her feelings, once she accepted it, she was more open than the ancient people. Although Gong Dai was brainwashed by her since he was young, under the influence of the surrounding environment, his nature was still reserved. Hearing Gong Yimo's passionate confession, his body trembled. He lowered his head to look at her cute little face and felt as if his heart was about to melt in her eyes. So he kissed her even more passionately and pressed her down on the bed, trapping her under his body. Why do you love me? In the midst of their passion, their hair tangled together. At this moment, the strong Gong Dai was like a young boy who had just experienced his first awakening of love. He pressed her down and asked this question seriously. Gong Yimo looked at his clear dark eyes and her cheeks flushed, because this man had sacrificed a lot for her. He suppressed his nature for her and did many things against his will for her. He worked hard for her and never gave up on her. She giggled and answered cheekily, "There's no part of you that I don't love." When Gong Dai heard this, his face turned red as expected. He kept a straight face, but his bright eyes and stiff body betrayed his shyness and nervousness. He asked again, "Then, why didn't you love me in the past?" This question seemed to be a little inappropriate. But men and women in love had no intelligence. He really wanted to be with her earlier, so why didn't she fall in love with him earlier? Gong Yimo was a little embarrassed. How could she say that he had gone overboard in his past life at this time? So she laughed it off. "Anyway, I love you now. Why, are you not satisfied?" She pouted and threatened him, but her eyes were half closed and her skin was pink. Lying under him, she hooked his heart. Gong Dai quickly shook his head and suddenly revealed a silly smile, but it was still devilishly beautiful. "I'm really happy. Royal sister, you're finally mine." Gong Yimo was also emotional. Gong Dai really had a hard time chasing her all this time. "Wrong, you're mine." Gong Dai kissed her affectionately. "I'm yours." Then he said in his heart, "But you're also mine." His eyes flashed as he looked at her and said softly, "I'm very grateful to Father. This is the first time I'm so grateful to him." At the mention of the Emperor, Gong Yimo's expression became dispirited, but she thought of something and her eyes lit up. "Let me show you something." As she spoke, she showed the imperial edict that the Emperor had given her to Gong Dai. Gong Dai hugged her and turned over so that she was lying in his arms. Then, he opened the imperial edict. Gong Dai was in disbelief when he saw the content. He glanced at Gong Yimo. He didn't expect that. Father would go to this extent for his royal sister. Even if she wasn't his biological daughter, it was better than that. Gong Yimo was a little emotional. "I don't want to announce this imperial edict." The emperor had just passed away, so it was perfectly justifiable for her to announce such an edict during the national funeral. But what would others say about the emperor? Father had been very good to her. His trust in her was greater than anything else, so she didn't want to tarnish his reputation after his death. Although she didn't care about these things, the world cared, and so did history. Gong Dai had a different idea. He felt that the reason why father had given the imperial edict to royal sister was probably not because he wanted to announce it now. This was father's last gift to royal sister. After a few years, when the new emperor was stable and the world was at peace, people would only remember father's good deeds. If he hadn't selflessly raised this girl, she wouldn't have done so many good things. The world would remember her kindness, and they would remember father's kindness. So, perhaps it was a win-win situation. It was just that royal sister had to suffer now, but with him around, no one would dare to make royal sister suffer. Chapter 604. For some reason, as Gong Dai held the imperial edict in his hand, a trace of understanding suddenly flashed through his heart. He thought of the last time he spoke with his imperial father. He did not conceal his killing intent towards Gong Che and his imperial father's troubled expression. Perhaps, this imperial edict was also meant for him. After all, even though his imperial father knew that his royal sister was in danger, he did not punish her. Although this was partly due to his reluctance to part with his royal sister, it was also unknown how much struggle he had gone through. Perhaps he wanted to use this opportunity to sell him a favor and let Gong Che off. Gong Dai could not help but laugh. As he held his beloved woman and held the imperial edict, he suddenly felt grateful. No matter what his imperial father's intentions were, he felt grateful. If Gong Che was honest in the future, he was willing to let him live. Gong Yimo suddenly thought of something and broke his train of thought. Gong Dai, why isn't this room decorated? Isn't the bridal chamber here? Gong Dai smiled and kissed her forehead. The bridal chamber is your room. Originally, Gong Yimo's room was the best in the entire Qi manor. Not only was there a large hot spring, it was also quiet and secluded. It was a pity that part of it was burned down, but he repaired it. Just thinking of having to consummate their marriage in the place where they used to live, Gong Yimo felt shy. At this time, someone knocked on the door. Your Highness, the wedding attire and crown have been prepared. Would Your Highness and Princess like to take a look? Gong Yimo suddenly felt a little excited. Gong Dai, how about I try it first to see if it fits? Of course, Gong Dai would listen to her, so he directly let her in. There were more than 10 people following behind the housekeeper. They were all bought from the human traffickers for the wedding banquet. In the past, there were only a few women in the entire Qi manor. In their hands were luxurious clothes and pearls, a dazzling lineup. Just thinking of how she would have to wear everything in their hands tomorrow, Gong Yimo blushed with shame. How heavy would it be? But she was also looking forward to it. Which woman did not want to be beautiful? It was fine for her to suffer a little in that kind of day. The most important thing was that she had to be beautiful and dazzling. After all, it was only once in a lifetime. When everyone came in, they saw that the aloof and cold prince would also gently hug a woman. They were a little envious, but they didn't dare to look too much. After all, they all knew how much the prince valued this woman. When Gong Yimo saw them come in, her gaze was immediately attracted by the phoenix coronet at the front. It was really beautiful, intricate, and shiny. Gong Yimo loved shiny things the most. Gong Dai waved his hand, and the woman carefully carried the phoenix coronet forward. Looking at it up close, it was even more breathtakingly beautiful. Does royal sister like it? This is Jin Xiu Grandmaster's final work. Although you haven't seen him, he likes you very much. Therefore, he personally made this phoenix crown for you. As he spoke, he pinched Gong Yimo's face. Are you proud, little demoness? Gong Yimo glared at him, and then her gaze was immediately attracted by the phoenix coronet. This phoenix coronet could be said to be made with all the known decorative materials in Daiyu state. With the naked eye, one could see that there were gold, silver, pearls, agate, shells, turquoise, ruby, ivory, jadeite, etc. There were also thousands of small golden beads and tassels. The craftsmanship was extremely complicated. Gong Yimo was subdued by it at a glance. Even if this phoenix coronet was very heavy, she would gladly endure it. Seeing that Gong Yimo liked the phoenix coronet so much, a woman standing in the crowd could not help but step forward and say, "Princess, try this wedding dress. It also suits you very well." Her words were gentle and pleasing. The big day was coming soon, and Gong Dai was rarely relaxed. He smiled at Gong Yimo and said, "That's right, there's also this wedding dress." He rarely looked at the woman. "You did very well. There will be a reward." Li Xiu instantly beamed with joy. "Thank you, Your Highness, for the reward." Gong Yimo's gaze fell on the tray in her hands, and her eyes lit up. "Open it and take a look." "Yes, Princess." Li Xiu hid the jealousy in her eyes, and with a smile, she slowly opened the wedding dress that she had spent all her effort on. There were many layers to the wedding dress, and the one in her hands was the outermost layer. It was also the most dazzling and luxurious one. Seeing that the princess wanted to take a look, the other people also opened the wedding dress in their hands. 2 people held up one piece, and immediately, the room was filled with that kind of magnificent color. Gong Yimo was really stunned. In her previous life, she knew that Li Xiu's embroidery skills were outstanding, and she was the best in the world. But in her previous life, she did not yearn for this kind of embroidery. She had only seen it a few times by chance, and each time, it was just some small handkerchief pictures. This kind of large embroidery, it was really the first time she saw it. Originally, Gong Yimo thought that the phoenix coronet was too luxurious, and the phoenix robe would be overshadowed by the phoenix coronet. But after the layers of wedding dress were opened, her worries were unnecessary. The embroidery skills and gorgeous colors were simply the epitome of splendid splendor. Ordinary women would be overshadowed by this kind of phoenix coronet and robe, right? Want to try it? Gong Dai's voice was so gentle. It was the same cold voice, but it was different for Gong Yimo. Gong Yimo stared at the beautiful wedding dress for a few seconds, and finally shook her head. "I'll wear it tomorrow." In any case, the size was really suitable. "Why?" Gong Dai was a little surprised. Gong Yimo was a little shy and whispered in his ear, "The first time you see it is the most impactful. I want to save the best for tomorrow and let you be stunned." Gong Dai heard this and looked at her passionately. "Okay, I'll do as you say." With that, he waved his hand, and everyone left. He hugged Gong Yimo and lay down again. In the afternoon, people were always a little tired. Gong Yimo yawned. "Just right, I'll recharge my energy and perform well tomorrow." She felt that tomorrow was a very important day, and she must not make any mistakes. But Gong Dai was not willing. "Royal sister, after we get married and attend the national funeral, let's leave." Gong Yimo was a little worried. "Is it okay to be away for a long time?" "Your position." Gong Dai was holding multiple positions. Without him, the entire Daiyu state would be in chaos. Gong Dai nodded lightly. "Your poison is the most important. I will make arrangements for the Daiyu state. Some positions cannot be left empty, and I will return them to the new emperor." Gong Dai thought it through. Unless he wanted to be the regent, Gong Che really could not die. After all, his other brothers were either suppressed to the point that they lost their fighting spirit, or they liked to play politics because they were smart. If he wanted the Daiyu state to not be in chaos, the only 2 outcomes were for Gong Che to be the regent, or for him to be the regent. Back then, the reason why he held multiple positions was to strengthen himself. The main purpose of being strong was to be together with royal sister. Now that they were together, it was not a pity to return power. Moreover, he had a mature military camp. Even if he handed over all his positions, he was not afraid that Gong Che would do anything to him. Chapter 605. Hearing Gong Dai's words, Gong Yimo secretly heaved a sigh of relief. Although Gong Che's gaze towards her was still the same as before, it was much dimmer, and he even began to deliberately avoid her. She felt that Gong Che had really given up. In this life, she had treated him unfairly from the start, so she didn't want Gong Che to lose his life because of her. It would be best if Gong Dai could let him go. Therefore, when she heard Gong Dai's words, she couldn't help but snuggle into his embrace and act coquettishly. "Gong Dai, you're so nice." Gong Dai raised his eyebrows slightly. Under those good-looking brows were a pair of captivating eyes. He rarely looked so enchanting, but every time, only Gong Yimo could see it. "What did you call me?" Gong Yimo instantly understood. "Husband." She hugged him and sweetly rubbed against him. "Husband, you don't know, but before today, I actually couldn't think straight." Gong Dai's hand that was gently patting her back paused, then continued to pat her. No matter what kind of mental journey royal sister had gone through, it was all in the past. Gong Yimo continued, "But father's death made me feel a lot of emotions." She rubbed against his chest again and finally said something in a muffled voice. "It's still good to be alive." Gong Dai nodded. "No matter how difficult it is, we can overcome it. Royal sister won't be defeated, and so will I. Will we be fine in the future?" Gong Yimo buried her head in his arms and asked softly. "Everything will be fine." They were able to overcome layers of obstacles and be together. Could there be a more difficult hurdle to overcome? Gong Yimo also felt that this journey had been tough. Perhaps they would soon find a way to suppress the Jiyu poison, and then hand over Dai Yu state to Gong Che. No matter how big the world was, they would be together forever. The two of them hugged each other quietly. They had never felt so peaceful before, because they had already won by being able to come this far. Gong Che listened to the little eunuch's words and was somewhat unable to recover from his shock. "You're saying Moa is pregnant?" The eunuch nodded. He thought about it again and felt that it was necessary to let the new emperor know about this. A hint of pain flashed through Gong Che's eyes, but perhaps he was already numb from the pain, so he felt relieved. His furrowed brows loosened little by little as he lowered his head and laughed. "Looks like tomorrow will be a day of double happiness." He sighed and exchanged his life for a congratulatory gift. Since she was pregnant, there were many things that he could not simply give away. Moreover, even though Moa was not his child, he liked her very much. Sometimes, Gong Che would be in a daze. In his previous life, he and Moa had been husband and wife for 12 years. How much sweetness had there been during that time? Sometimes, she wondered why they didn't have children. But now, none of this was important. She was about to marry his younger brother, and he no longer had the right and strength to pester her. Time passed little by little. The entire Qi manor was very busy. Even at night, there was still an endless stream of people coming and going. After dinner, Gong Yimo pestered Gong Dai. Okay, just promise me." However, Gong Dai's face was stiff. "Anything else is fine, but not this." Royal sister actually wanted him to make 2 sets of iron chains for her to wear. How could this be? That was their wedding day. How uncomfortable would it be for her to wear iron chains? For peace of mind, Gong Yimo had no other choice. If Gong Dai did not agree, she would continue to pester him. "Gong Dai, there will be so many people tomorrow. Moreover, Shuewux's poison is very regular, but I'm not. What if I start a massacre? Are we still going to get married?" Gong Dai's face was ashen. This little girl, can't she think of something better? "Nothing will happen. Don't worry, okay?" Gong Dai had no choice but to say, "I'll get them to brew some calming medicine for you." "Nothing will happen." Gong Yimo looked at him pitifully. "Husband. I just don't want anything to happen tomorrow." Gong Dai could not stand her gaze and sighed in his heart. The two of them were in a deadlock. In the end, Gong Dai had no choice but to be defeated by her gaze. "Royal sister, have you decided?" Gong Yimo nodded. "Don't worry, I won't feel uncomfortable." Gong Ju had no choice but to agree with her. He then ordered someone to make a pair of bracelets and shackles overnight. Originally, Gong Yimo wanted him to shackle her hands behind her back. However, this time, Gong Dai would not agree no matter what. She was his wife, not a prisoner. Even if she was really poisoned, he would bear all the consequences. On the bed, Gong Yimo was still restless. "Gong Dai, is it okay for you to sleep with me like this? We're only getting married tomorrow." Gong Dai hugged her from behind. After bathing, the fragrance on her body became stronger, calming his mind. "It's okay." No one dared to say anything. Gong Yimo was a little shy. Wouldn't everyone know that before they got married? Cough cough, she turned over in his arms and faced him. She raised her head and looked at him. Gong Dai, when you were young, did you ever think that you would marry me one day? Gong Dai closed his eyes and did not say anything. However, he hugged her even tighter. When he was young, how could he dare to have such extravagant hopes? All along, he had been desperately chasing after her footsteps. As he grew older and closer, he dared to have such extravagant hopes. When he was young, he wanted to be with her forever. However, he did not expect to be with such an identity. Husband and wife. Gong Yimo smiled and touched his chin. When did you mature so early? Heh, what I mean is, when did you start to like me? Gong Dai thought for a while and finally opened his eyes. I can't remember clearly. When he was young, perhaps he did not know what love was. He only knew that he wanted to be with her and wanted to make her happy. Hence, he really did not know when he started to like her. Gong Yimo's eyes flashed with a hint of slyness. Let me ask you this. When did you start to want to touch me? Gong Dai's face suddenly turned suspiciously red. He stared at Gong Yimo. Can't sleep. Gong Yimo was not going to let it go. Tell me. I'm very curious. When Gong Dai heard her soft voice, he did not have any bottom line. He wanted to refuse to answer, but in her eyes, which seemed to have little stars, he only wanted to satisfy all her curiosity. Hence, he lowered his head and whispered in her ear. What the? It can't be. Gong Yimo was stunned after hearing that. 8 years old, this was too early. Gong Dai coughed a little awkwardly. Let's sleep. Both of them had to wake up early the next morning. Like Gong Yimo, he placed great importance on it. Hence, he wanted to sleep early to recover his energy. Gong Yimo replied with an "oh" and did not say anything in his arms. After a while, she turned over and faced him with her butt. In the long night, when both of them did not speak, the entire house was too quiet. Chapter 606. The candlelight swayed quietly. Although Gong Dai was hugging her, his body wasn't in her way. Lying there like this was really a little weird. After a while, Gong Yimo felt that her entire body didn't feel right. She had showered every day, but why did she feel like scratching here and there? As for Gong Dai, it was as if he had really fallen asleep. Gong Yimo was a little dissatisfied. Didn't they say that once a man started to have sex, he couldn't stop? How could Gong Dai be so pure? It had been so long, and they had only had sex twice, but why didn't she think about how dirty she was on those 2 occasions? She was so fresh that she felt embarrassed, okay? Finally, when she tried to turn over again, Gong Ju's body suddenly pressed against hers, and his hands tightly grasped her. At that moment, she finally felt his body burning hot. Through her thin clothes, it was as if it was going to burn her skin. Gong Yimo let out a soft cry. Just as she was about to turn around, Gong Dai hugged her tightly from behind. His hot breath blew into her ear, causing her to shrink her neck sensitively. Gong Dai laughed deeply. In the night, on the bed, his laughter was a little naughty, but damn it, it was sexy. Royal sister, your body seems to be itchy. Where is it itchy? Let me help you scratch it, okay? Gong Yimo instantly felt that she wasn't itchy anymore. Her face flushed red. It's not itchy. Sleep. Royal sister, you're not honest, Gong Ju said softly, but his hands that were tightly clasped around her waist moved up a little bit. With an ambiguous force, his hands wandered around her body. Since you're not going to tell me, I'll find it myself. Is it itchy? Gong Yimo blushed and struggled a little. It's itchy. Her struggle made Gong Dai gasp. Even though his eyes were a little red from holding it in, his Adam's apple moved, and he asked again. What about here? Is it itchy? Millimeter. Let go. She was ticklish to begin with, not to mention at a time like this. Under such an ambiguous atmosphere, her sensitivity was at its peak. Even if Gong Dai's gentle and seductive fingertips were to touch her hair, she would still complain that it was itchy, all right? Her soft voice of refusal was like the most seductive aphrodisiac. Gong Dai couldn't bear it anymore. He turned over and pressed her down, pretending to be in a difficult position. What should we do? Royal sister, you're itchy all over, so I have no choice but to help you stop the itch. What kind of nickname was that? Why was it so embarrassing to use it in such a place? No, Gong Yimo thought of the previous 2 earth-shattering meets and shamefully refused. She still wanted to be beautiful tomorrow. If they really started, she wouldn't be able to sleep tonight. Gong Dai let out a muffled groan as she struggled. Every part of her body was extremely elastic, which was related to her martial arts training. This kind of zero-distance twisting was simply a fatal seduction. Originally, he wanted to let her go. Tomorrow was their big day, and it was just one night. He thought that he could bear it, but he didn't expect that he couldn't bear it at all. This tormenting little vixen was still teasing him. He waved his hand, and all the lights in the room went out. At the last second before the lights went out, Gong Dai's hair was scattered over his shoulders as he pressed down on her body. That exquisite face was outlined by the light, and the shadow was like a soul-sucking demon, while the light was exquisite and cold like a god. The 2 kinds of beauty intertwined and collided, causing her heart to involuntarily pound. In the next second, the lights went out, and this kind of beauty disappeared instantly. Although the eyes couldn't see, the senses were sharper. She could feel that the other party was getting closer to her, and then a hot kiss gently landed on her lips. It was clearly just a kiss, but in this quiet and dark night, it was like a drop of ice water falling into boiling lava. Both of their hearts were restless, and then the lava exploded. They also exploded. Gong Yimo's hands were tightly wrapped around his neck, and Gong Dai's suppressed passion was ignited by her wildness. Both of their clothes gradually fell off as they kissed, and their skin touched. Gong Yimo turned over and pressed Gong Dai under her body. Gong Dai, I want you. These few words almost drove Gong Dai crazy. He almost didn't think about it as he pressed Gong Yimo under his body, and told her what he wanted. It's me, I want you. The night was still very long, but the couple who had been abstinent for a long time, and were about to become newlyweds, were inseparable. The intensity of the passion. It was embarrassing to say that suspicious sounds could be heard in the surrounding courtyard. Only when the moon was high in the sky did the 2 of them stop their shameful actions. Gong Yimo couldn't even lift a finger, and her whole body felt like it was being crushed. It turned out that the descriptions in those pornographic novels weren't all lies. She lay on the bed and wailed, "Let me die, I definitely don't want to wake up early tomorrow." Gong Dai also knew that he was being rash, and quickly coaxed her, "Then tomorrow morning, I'll order the wedding to be held in the afternoon." Gong Yimo looked at him with a speechless expression, and complained, "Gong Dai, you've changed, you've become shameless. How could this kind of thing be changed so easily?" And the reason was that she couldn't get out of bed and wanted to sleep in. If this were to spread out, she wouldn't be able to live anymore. Gong Dai, who pampered his wife to no end, quickly complied, "Yes. I'm shameless, don't move, I'll help you wipe it." Not only was he shameless, but he also consciously turned from a prince consort to a boy toy. After washing up, he was very gentle and considerate. Gong Yimo lay on the bed and enjoyed his service. Suddenly, she felt that this kind of feeling was not bad. The water is a little cold. She started to find fault with him. Unexpectedly, Gong Dai's temper was good, and he quickly went to add hot water without any hesitation. As Gong Dai had already planned this, he had already chased away all the servants in the courtyard. And now, Gong Yimo was so shy that she refused to let Gong Dai wake those people up. Fortunately, there was hot water in the small kitchen in the courtyard all day long, or else they would have to boil water in the middle of the night. After adding hot water, he rubbed her body with a towel. With the right amount of strength, there was a kind of comfortable feeling that made one want to moan. Only one lamp was lit, and under the dim orange light, Gong Yimo was completely naked, openly showing Gong Dai. Although she was still a little shy, when she realized that Gong Dai was even more shy than her, she immediately let go of her shyness and deliberately provoked him. Who asked him to be so ruthless just now? If she hadn't shouted to stop, the situation would have been worse. Gong Dai was very talented, so even though it was the 3rd time they had sex, Gong Yimo still felt very uncomfortable. Thinking about the moaning just now, she felt embarrassed. How could it have been her moaning? Whenever she felt embarrassed, she would want to torture Gong Dai, so in the middle of the night, she ordered fiercely and deliberately teased him. Yes, on the left, use more strength, millimeter, comfortable. Chapter 607. Her voice was a little hoarse. Gong Dai felt that he couldn't take it anymore when she used such a voice to say such things. Gong Yimo snickered and said in an even more seductive voice. Harder, harder, you can't take it anymore? Pa. This was the sound of a towel hitting a basin of water. A certain beast couldn't take a few simple words and wanted to continue. Why couldn't he do it? But Gong Yimo used her leg to press against his chest. Don't do it, my stomach hurts, she said as if she was avoiding him, but it wasn't an act. Her lower abdomen really hurt a little as she looked pitifully at Gong Dai. Seeing this, Gong Dai hurriedly said, What's wrong? Wait, I'll call the doctor. Why would he call the doctor at this time? Gong Yimo held him back. Her blushing meant that she was probably, cough cough, in pain because of Gong Dai. If the doctor saw it, she might as well die. Gong Dai also felt a little embarrassed when he heard this. But you're in pain. I'm fine. I think I'm all right again. I'm just so hungry. I really want to eat Sugar Heart House's sweet biscuits now. It was fine if he didn't say it, but once he said it, Gong Yimo felt that she was itching to eat it. Gong Dai, what should I do? I feel like I've contracted a disease where I'll die if I don't eat Sugar Heart House's sweet biscuits. When Gong Ju heard her words, he was both angry and amused. He pinched her face hard and said exasperatedly, If you want to eat it, then eat it. What's with dying? Royal sister, you're being naughty again. Gong Yimo slapped his hand away and looked at the sky outside. She said awkwardly, But it's the middle of the night and they haven't opened the door yet. Gong Ju stretched out his hand and gently flicked her forehead. Silly. It's this prince's woman's honor to want to eat their food in the middle of the night. As he spoke, he really helped her put on her clothes. Freshly baked food is the best. Let's go together. You can eat anything you want. Gong Yimo's eyes lit up. She didn't need him to wear it. She quickly put it on herself. Let's go. She was in high spirits, as if she wasn't the one who was afraid of disturbing the people. Gong Dai smiled dotingly. Thinking that her body was still sore and weak at this time, he directly grabbed her waist and jumped over the wall with her Qing Gong. The Wang Fu was heavily guarded, and Gong Dai didn't avoid them either. The people who were patrolling in the dark just watched their Wangye and the future princess climb over the wall. No one else could do this. In the past, when the princess was not around, His Highness would never have such abnormal behavior. It could only be said that with the princess around, His Highness seemed to be more lively. Even if he had a cold face, he did not give off a cold feeling. This is great. The night was dark and the wind was strong. Gong Dai really did not let Gong Yimo move. He carried her the entire way and found the familiar Sugar Heart Pavilion. Sugar Heart Pavilion's desserts were very good. The royal sister liked to eat their desserts the most. They were sweet, but not greasy, and were very fragrant. Gong Dai placed Gong Yimo in front of the door and jumped into Sugar Heart Pavilion's backyard, which was where the boss and lady boss lived. She didn't know what happened, but not long after, Gong Yimo heard a commotion inside. Not long after, the door was opened. Gong Dai smiled as he pulled her in and said to her, When the shopkeeper heard that you wanted to eat it, he was very happy and prepared to personally cook it. Gong Yimo looked at Gong Dai's clean and harmless face. Was it really good to lie through his teeth like this? The boss was now rich and did not cook himself, all right? But this was Gong Dai's way of showing his care for her. She held his hand tightly and said with a grin, There's no need for too much. One is enough. We can't let them tire themselves out in the middle of the night, right? It had to be said that these two were very thick-skinned. Gong Yimo was brought directly to the kitchen by Gong Dai. At this time, not only was the boss and lady boss waiting there, but the waiters were also there. It could be seen that they were all dressed in a hurry. They were all beaming with joy as they respectfully welcomed them. The boss did not waste any words and directly began to cook. The lady boss helped from the side. It had to be said that ever since Sugar Heart Pavilion became famous, they rarely cooked themselves, but with Prince Chi's presence, they could not slack off even if they wanted to. The boss was a fatty. At this time, he was smiling on the surface, but his heart was crying. This was the second time. This was the second time that Prince Chi had dug him out of his bed in the middle of the night. Fortunately, when the prince came, he was not working. Otherwise, he would have been scared out of his wits. Gong Dai watched from the side. This time, he did not need to say anything. The boss already knew the requirements. He had to add more sugar and burn both sides. Woo-woo, he could not think about it. The more he thought about it, the more he wanted to cry. Gong Yimo rested her head on Gong Dai's shoulder. Although she was embarrassed, she had to admit that her heart was warm. This man, he really placed her at the top of his heart and doted on her. She was somewhat worried. If this continued, would she be doted on by this man until she degenerated? The sugar cookies were not difficult to make and were quickly finished. The boss smiled and trembled as he put the cookies in a paper bag and handed it over. He suddenly thought that the oiled paper bag was too shabby. He felt that it was time for him to prepare some small baskets of gold, silver, and pearls for Prince Chi's next surprise visit. However, Gong Dai did not mind this. Because it was still very hot, he took it first and then left with Gong Yimo. Seeing that they had really left, the boss let out a long sigh of relief. Although Prince Chi's requirements were very frightening, the reward was also very generous. So much money to buy a cookie. The fat boss wanted to cry but had no tears. Should he say that Prince Chi was really worthy of running a bank? Gong Yimo hugged the cookie and ate 2 bites. However, she suddenly frowned and did not eat anymore. What's wrong? Gong Dai immediately noticed. Is it not delicious? At this moment, they were sitting on the roof. The sweet smell of the cookies spread, but Gong Yimo's face fell, as if she was very embarrassed. I suddenly don't want to eat anymore. Gong Yimo wanted to cry. Would Gong Dai think that she was being unreasonable? However, she did not want to eat anymore. Who knew that Gong Dai would ask with a smile, then what do you want to eat? Gong Yimo smacked her lips and said embarrassedly, I want to eat Cloud Plum Workshop's sweet and sour plums. Without another word, Gong Dai carried Gong Yimo and jumped off the roof. Are we really going? Gong Yimo was a little shy. Gong Dai smiled and said, you can have anything you want as long as it's within my ability. Even if I can't do it, I will try my best to make it for you. What's more, it's just a few plums. He said it casually, but Gong Yimo blushed. She hugged Gong Dai's neck with one hand and nibbled on the cookie with the other. She did not want to eat, so she nibbled on it in small bites. From time to time, she would bring it to Gong Dai's mouth for him to eat. She could not waste food, right? She giggled. Chapter 608. Because the plums were already pickled, they did not alert anyone this time and sneaked into the cellar to steal the plums. After filling a little, Gong Yimo stopped, and Gong Dai put a banknote on the jar. When she saw the denomination, Gong Yimo was immediately unhappy. You're such a wastrel. She put the banknotes away in disappointment. How can a few plums cost so much? She blushed as she took out some silver from her pocket and put it on the jar. This is enough. Gong Dai looked at her with a smile. Under the dim light, Gong Yimo's cheeks were burning. She heard that when you fell in love with someone, you would unconsciously save money for them. She did not expect it to be true. Let's go. Gong Dai pulled Gong Yimo's hand and left. During this time, he heard Gong Yimo ask in a low voice. How much did you spend on the cookies just now? Gong Dai did not answer. Gong Yimo understood. Who spoiled you to have this bad habit of spending money? If you have money, you should spend it where it's needed most. Blah blah blah. Back then, we had such a hard time. Blah blah blah. How did you develop such a bad habit? Gong Yimo said a lot. Once they were out of the door, Gong Dai picked her up. Gong Yimo very obediently found a comfortable position in his arms and continued to lecture him. If you are poor, you should take care of yourself. If you are rich, you should help the world. It seems that I will not only have to improve your aesthetics, but also set up the correct economic values for you. Sigh, there was still a long way to go. Gong Dai finally could not help but laugh. Under the moonlight, he was like an immortal in the moon. All the coldness faded away, and his eyes were filled with a gentleness that could drown a person. In the future, you will be in charge of the money, he said seriously. Gong Yimo was stunned and immediately refused. I don't want to. Managing money means that you have to look at the account books. You have so many accounts at home, I don't want them. Yes, it's our home, Gong Dai corrected her and said dotingly. I'll look after the accounts, and you'll be in charge of the money, okay? Gong Yimo was finally embarrassed by his gentle voice. Why did she get all the benefits? She was going to be spoiled rotten if she allowed him to take whatever he wanted. Therefore, Gong Yimo pretended to be fierce and said, then don't regret it. Every day. I will only give you a little pocket money. Gong Dai couldn't help but laugh again. Why was his royal sister so cute? It was fine that she was cute when she was young, but why was it that when she grew up, he loved her so much that he couldn't put her down? He wished he could carry her with him every day and pamper her all the time. Okay. He didn't need pocket money anyway. Gong Yimo saw that she couldn't scare him, so she said fiercely, I'm very stingy. I'll give you 1 tael of silver every day. Okay, I'll do as you say. His royal sister had no concept of money at all. If she had it, she would spend it. If she didn't, she wouldn't spend it. This kind of pretense of being stingy was really too interesting. Gong Yimo's face was bitter. Thinking about it, when Gong Dai went out, who would dare to ask him to spend money? There would be tons and tons of people sending money to him. What a blunder. She realized that she couldn't control this man. What should I do? She raised her head pitifully in his arms. You're not afraid of anything. I can't even control you. What if you rebel in the future? Gong Dai finally couldn't hold it in anymore. He hugged her and kissed her fiercely. I really don't know what a little vixen like you is thinking about every day. Under the moonlight, he looked at her with smiling eyes. His eyes were filled with love that couldn't be dispersed. You don't have to control me. I can't leave you. You can't chase me away even if you want to. Gong Yimo really couldn't handle this shameless man. She turned her head away fiercely and didn't look at him. Then, she reached out and took out a plum and put it in her mouth. Gong Ju held her in his arms as they walked back step by step. On the bluestone floor, their shadows overlapped, elongated. Seeing Gong Yimo's unhappy expression, Gong Dai asked with a smile. What's wrong now? Gong Yimo muttered unhappily. Yun Mai Fang is really doing well. It's like this sugar is free. The pickled plums are only sweet and not sour. It was so tasty in the past when they were sweet and sour. Gong Dai didn't have a say in this matter. Most of the things that royal sister liked to eat were too sweet for him. Therefore, if the royal sister liked to eat something sweet, his scalp would definitely tingle. If you don't like it, then don't eat it. If you don't like the food outside, I'll get the servants to make it for you tomorrow. Make whatever you like. Gong Yimo was finally interested. I want to eat roasted whole lamb. She didn't know why, but when she thought of roasted whole lamb, she thought of the one she had at Lu Yi. It was fragrant and tender. No, she was about to drool. Gong Dai nodded. Okay, I'll make roasted whole lamb for you tomorrow. Gong Yimo happily rubbed against his chest. Gong Dai, why are you so nice? Gong Dai smiled but didn't say anything. He would only be nice to her. Gong Yimo, however, thought of something else. Gong Dai, after the poison is cured, how about we have a child? Gong Dai naturally agreed. He really hoped to have a daughter as cute as royal sister. Then, what's the name? Gong Yimo struggled in his arms. When the time comes, the son will take your surname and the daughter will take mine. How about that? Gong Dai couldn't help but laugh when he saw how serious she was. Royal sister, we have the same surname. That's right. Gong Yimo's head hurt. Why did she suddenly think of those young couples in modern times? She really didn't have enough brainpower recently. Then what should we name them? She rubbed her chin. A boy's name should be cooler, just like you. A girl's name should also be more masculine. I heard that names can determine a person's personality. I don't like delicate and soft little girls. This was difficult for Gong Dai because he liked delicate and soft little girls. He wanted to spoil their daughter into the happiest princess. How could she not be delicate? Gong Ji, Gong Jr., Gong Yui. Gong Dai heard the names she came up with. Which one of them was suitable for a girl? Gong Yimo, however, looked determined. It's decided. No matter if it's a boy or a girl, our first child will be called Gong Ji. What do you think? No. Hey. This was the first time Gong Dai had objected to her. Gong Dai pursed his lips. If it's a girl, she'll definitely be a princess. A name like Gong Ji. He didn't even want to complain anymore. However, Gong Yimo didn't let it go. I don't want that. The name is just like the person. I don't want my daughter to be a crybaby. Gong Ji won't do. Gong Dai insisted. He had to fight for the welfare of his future daughter. Gong Yimo glared at him. Since you want to pamper your daughter so much, then just call her Palace Lord. It's simple and clear. Unexpectedly, Gong Dai nodded. That's not bad. Gong Yimo wailed. As expected. She shouldn't have held out hope for Gong Dai's taste. The two of them argued as they headed to Qi Manor. The road was very long, but they didn't realize that Gong Yimo was still arguing. She didn't notice the smirk on Gong Dai's face. He was teasing her. Silly Momo. Chapter 609. Gongs and drums rang out. Bailey Hongzhuang. The cold of early winter was dispelled by the lively atmosphere. Gong Yimo was marrying Gong Dai. Originally, Gong Yimo thought that everyone would reject it, but she didn't expect that the common people would accept it, very enthusiastically crowding around her sedan chair. The common people's thoughts were very simple. The princess was someone they respected. She had her reasons for every decision she made. Therefore, even if many people did not understand, they were still happy from the bottom of their hearts on the day of her wedding. They celebrated for her. The sedan chair set off directly from Chi Wangfu and then circled around the city before returning to Chi Wangfu. On the road, more and more common people crowded around. Seeing that they could accept this marriage, Gong Yimo was happy from the bottom of her heart, a sweet smile appearing on her face. Sitting in the sedan chair and listening to the lively cheers, her heart was very calm. Right now, her hands and feet were shackled, but she was very happy and her heart was very satisfied. As long as she could safely get through today, they could leave the capital together to find the antidote. Then, she wouldn't be a threat to others. Although to Gong Dai, she was still a time bomb. If he wasn't careful, he would hurt himself, but Gong Yimo's hands were shackled. She couldn't bear to die. If one day, she really went crazy and hurt Gong Dai, then after she woke up, she would die with him. Although she was selfish, who told Gong Dai to always spoil her? Gong Yimo snickered. Although this wedding was rushed, it was very grand. The standard was very high, comparable to the wedding of the Empress. The amount of dowry far exceeded the etiquette. Not only was there the dowry bestowed by the emperor, there was also the dowry sent by Gong Che, as well as the dowry sent by other countries. It directly blocked the 4 city gates. It could be said that this was unprecedented. Gong Yimo didn't want to tell Kim Yoon and the others. After all, they had a lot of things to do in the country, and she was in a hurry. However, Kim Yoon and the others were of noble status. In the end, they found out about it through other channels. Time was too tight, so they couldn't come in person. However, they rushed to send gifts, and each of them sent a lot. In addition to them, some of Gong Yimo's former friends also sent a lot of gifts. Shun Shiyi even silently sent a total of 50 sets of dowry. In the end, all of the dowry converged into 4 long lines that flowed into the Qi Manor from different directions. Everyone could not help but sigh with emotion. Fortunately, the Qi Manor was large enough. Otherwise, they would have been drowned by the dowry. The housekeeper checked the items one by one and was almost dazzled by the dazzling array of treasures. He couldn't help but sigh in his heart. The princess was really popular. Although there were many gifts that came because of Gong Dai's identity, there were even more good things that came from all over the place because of the princess. Fortunately, His Highness was quick to react. Otherwise, the princess would have been snatched away by those who were eyeing her covetously. The housekeeper proudly thought to himself as he registered the items. The main hall was filled with guests. In addition to the important officials of Daiyu State, the princes and princesses, Gong Che sat at the front, presiding over the ceremony on behalf of Gong Cheng. From time to time, the envoys from the other 3 countries would chat with Gong Che about business. In short, the atmosphere was peaceful and lively. Gong Dai had spent a lot of effort on this wedding banquet. However, he was more worried about Gong Yimo's health. Therefore, he had cut out a lot of the ceremonial procedures that required the presence of the bride. Sometimes, he would do it alone. Therefore, most of the time, Gong Ju was the only one in charge of the family's affairs. However, no one dared to say that the bride was putting on airs. Since the prince was willing, they should just happily congratulate him. Finally, the auspicious hour arrived. Welcome the bride. Following the announcement, Gong Yimo walked out of the side room with a red face. She had been lazing around in the side room, so she was embarrassed. However, all of this was arranged by Gong Dai, so she accepted it with ease. Her long dress trailed behind her, and her gorgeous crown sparkled. The moment Gong Yimo came out, she attracted the attention of everyone from all directions. The originally bustling hall was instantly silenced. Hundreds of people stared at her. They were shocked, envious, and most of them were infatuated. She didn't wear a hood over her head, instead, she covered her face with a fan. She walked slowly with an indescribable elegance. Her eyes seemed to gather the stars in the night sky. Everyone's breath was taken away, including Gong Ju's. Gong Dai suddenly hated the design of the high crown. It couldn't be worn with a veil. It was a waste of people's eyes. The officials sighed in their hearts. No wonder Prince Qi was willing to risk universal condemnation to marry her. Not to mention her talent, just her appearance alone was better than all the women in the world. No wonder, the new emperor couldn't forget her. Gong Che looked at her in a daze. Just as he had imagined, she should look like this when she got married. Peerless in her generation, unparalleled in the world. Gong Che felt sour in his heart. He thought that he could get the woman he loved after he became the emperor. But he didn't expect that the woman he loved after so many years of being infatuated with, he missed her in his previous life. Then, when she married him in his previous life, was she like this? The envoys from various countries were also sighing. They couldn't help but think to themselves. No wonder their king, His Majesty, couldn't forget this woman. She indeed had the potential to bring disaster to the world, not to mention the ability to bring disaster to the world. This was his wife. Gong Dai's heart raced as he strode towards her. Gong Dai had never worn red. Because when he was young, in order to convince the people around him, he had to imperceptibly make himself look calm to deepen the first impression. Even after he grew up and became stronger, he still didn't change this habit. He always wore black, and occasionally white, but it was rare. But today, he looked extraordinarily handsome in his bright red robe. His tall and straight figure gave off a domineering aura when he wore red, and the fiery color made his cold face seem gentler. His exquisite features were slightly revealed, and there was a different kind of enchantment. His focused gaze made it seem as if he was the only one in the world. There was a faint scent of incense on his body. It was light and very suitable for him. Gong Dai reached out his hand, and Gong Yimo naturally held his hand as they walked forward. But she consciously hid the metal chain so that no one would find it. At this moment, the envoys from various countries hurried over to greet them. Their task was not only to add to the dowry, but also to express their longing for their masters. So, they lined up to greet them. The first to arrive was Kim Yoon's subordinate, Yu Hung. He was shorter and had a moustache. He said with a smile, "Greetings to the princess. I am Yu Hung's envoy, Liu Nian. The princess has just gotten married, and due to the lack of time, the emperor sent me here to express his apologies. During the new year, the 4 countries will have a gathering. At that time, The emperor will personally come to congratulate you. I hope you won't mind. Not at all. Chapter 610. This made Gong Yimo even more embarrassed. She had gotten married in a flash. She was already very surprised that Kim Yoon had come to add to her dowry. She smiled and said, "Please help me tell big brother Kim Yoon that we will not return until we are drunk." Liu Nyan smiled and retreated. Then came Lu Yis and Yu Chi's ambassadors. They all said the same thing, expressing their regret that Gong Yimo would not be able to make it to the wedding. However, there were other regrets as well. For example, Sai Wuyen directly asked someone to tell her that if Gong Dai bullied her, she could go to Yu Chi to play. Lu Yis' ambassador quickly nodded. She could also come to Lu Yis horse racing. Gong Dai quickly pulled his wife behind him and glared at them. These wolves had wild ambitions. They would not have a chance. Qi King's residence opened wide. From time to time, people would come to the wedding hall to offer their congratulations and gifts. Most of them were wealthy commoners. They would not enter the hall and would leave after giving their congratulations. However, there was an endless stream of people who came to offer their congratulations. This grand occasion could be said to be unprecedented. Gradually, the people who came to offer their gifts were almost done. The ceremonial officer shouted loudly, "The auspicious time has arrived. Bride and groom, please bow to heaven and earth." The wine and laughter stimulated the senses of the crowd. The officials were usually submissive, but when they looked at Gong Dai, their eyes revealed mischievous expressions. Qi King was really lucky to be able to marry such a beauty. Gong Dai was a little nervous as he pulled Gong Yimo forward. The surrounding laughter and the enthusiasm in the air made him feel dizzy. Gong Yimo was held by him with one hand, while the other hand covered her face with a fan. She smiled even more happily when she felt the wetness from his palm. Some malicious laughter could be heard. When the crowd saw that Gong Dai's posture was a little stiff, they knew that he was nervous. After all, he was still young. This was his first time being a groom, so he was too shy. "Bow to heaven and earth," someone shouted. Who knew that this shout would make everyone excited and shout, "Bow to heaven and earth." Quickly enter the bridal chamber. Gong Yimo couldn't help but lower her head. She really looked like a shy bride in ancient times. First bow to heaven and earth. The couple looked at each other, then held hands and bowed to heaven and earth. At this moment, the crowd quieted down. The majority of the people present were well-read people. At the start, they had not approved of this marriage, but they had been forced by King Chi's might. However, at this moment, when these people saw the two of them bowing to the heavens and earth, they couldn't help but smile kindly. A talented man and a beautiful woman, a match made in heaven. Was there a husband and wife more compatible than them? Second bow to the emperor. The two of them turned around and bowed to Gong Che. Gong Che watched as Gong Yimo bowed down to him, but the person holding her hand was someone else. That kind of pain lingered in the bones, but no one knew. "Your Majesty," the young eunuch reminded him from the side. Only then did Gong Che realize that he was lost in thought again. No need for formalities. As expected, Gong Dai was staring at him with an unfriendly gaze. He smiled bitterly. Once she married, he would be the monarch and she would be the official wife. The gap between them would be forever. But no matter how reluctant he was, she didn't love him. No matter what he did, she would never believe him again. He sighed and suppressed his trembling heart. In the end, he still decided to tell them about Mo-er's pregnancy. Even if he didn't say it, Gong Dai would soon know. If he said it, it could be considered as doing a favor to Mo-er. He prepared a pair of rare jade pendants and gave them to the two of them. "This was given to me by Imperial Father. I give it to you. I hope that you two will be together for 100 years. Gong Yimo smiled and accepted it. Gong Dai looked at him with a guarded gaze. "Thank you, Your Majesty. Also, I have another good news to tell you. It can be considered a double blessing." Gong Che's face was a bit pale, but he forced a smile. The couple looked at him, waiting for him to speak. "Mo-er." You're pregnant. Gong Dai. Give me back my wife's life. An angry shout was heard. Gong Dai turned around and saw a sharp arrow coming at him from a tricky angle. It was impossible to guard against it. The other party was menacing, and his internal strength was extremely profound. He wasn't an ordinary person, so Gong Ju didn't let his subordinates attack. Instead, he directly pulled out a guard's sword and blocked the attack. They were both at the 6th level of wind and nature, but he was much stronger than Gong Yimo. The moves that were supposed to be rhythmic and natural were actually overflowing with murderous intent when he used them. After a moment of dead silence, there were earth-shattering screams. "Protect the Emperor! Protect the Emperor!" The little eunuch shouted. The hall was in chaos and countless guards suddenly appeared. They protected the Emperor and the ministers as if they had already expected this. Gong Dai always comforted Gong Yimo, telling her to relax and not to worry about the Jiu poison exploding. Everything would be fine. But he still secretly prepared a defense in case of an emergency. These guards were all Gong Dai's elite subordinates. Their uniform movements and murderous aura made everyone feel at ease. With their protection, the panicked crowd wasn't so afraid anymore. Although it was still noisy, it was much calmer. With Prince Qi around, no matter how strong the intruder was, he wouldn't be able to do anything. So under the layers of protection, everyone gradually calmed down. Many people ran to the Emperor's side and asked about his well-being, expressing their worry. Lo Qi and the others comforted them and wanted to bring people to take down the assassin, but Gong Dai roared. "Don't come over." He knew how strong the intruder was, but he didn't pose a threat. So Gong Dai gave a serious order. "Protect the princess." Lo Qi and the others instantly understood. The intruder wasn't the most serious thing. After all, no matter how strong the intruder was, he was only one person. But they might have other tricks up their sleeves. Now that the princess was poisoned, she was in a very dangerous situation. They couldn't afford to make any mistakes. So they were on guard, protecting the princess and not letting anyone suspicious get close. Gong Yimo's hand that was holding the fan tightened. The intruder was Qiu Zhongchan. He had disappeared for so long, it seemed like he was recuperating. Now that he suddenly attacked, he said it was for his wife, Xue Wuxi. But it definitely wasn't that simple. He didn't know who instigated him, but it seemed like he was certain that Gong Dai killed his wife. He didn't hold back at all. It seemed like he didn't care about his meridians at all and only wanted revenge. Someone came knocking on his door on such a day. Gong Dai couldn't wait to tear the intruder into 1,000 pieces, so when Qiu Zhongchan went all out, the two of them could still fight to a draw. But under Gong Dai's anger, he actually suppressed the other party. The two of them intended to fight outside. Gong Yimo was a little worried and prepared to follow. "Don't go." Gong Che hurriedly pushed the guards aside and said anxiously, "There's poison in your body. You can't take it. Don't go." His worry was sincere, it was purely out of concern for her. Gong Yimo rejected his good intentions. "We are bound together for good or ill. I am his wife." Chapter 611. Seeing Gong Che's pale face, she softened her tone and said softly, "It's dangerous here. Why don't your majesty return to the palace with the other envoys? I'm afraid today's wedding, it couldn't be." "How can that be?" Gong Che looked outside. "It's just an assassin. Prince Qi can get rid of him. Today's wedding is father's edict. I'll wait here. It's fine." Even though he was heartbroken, he knew how much effort these two had put into this wedding. Moa was already pregnant. They couldn't wait until she was pregnant. All the guests were protected and there was only one assassin. No matter how powerful he was, once Gong Dai got rid of him, the wedding could still go on. "Thank you." Gong Yimo's gratitude came from her heart. She smiled at Gong Che and went out. Although she couldn't do anything, she wanted to see if she could help. After all, Qiu Zhongchan's martial arts were strong. If she really wanted to kill him, it wouldn't be that easy. Gong Ju's moves were ruthless. After a while, Qiu Zhongchan's body was covered with wounds, but the more he fought, the braver he became. He glared at Gong Ju, as if he wanted to swallow this enemy into his stomach. Gong Dai was even more furious. He wanted to make today's wedding a perfect day. He didn't expect that when his royal sister was fine, someone dared to cause trouble. It was unforgivable. Both of them fought in the courtyard outside the wedding hall. It seemed like they didn't want to hurt the innocent. Gong Yimo was protected by the crowd and couldn't help but ask, "Zhenren Qiu, let's talk nicely. Why do you have to fight on such a day?" To be honest, Qiu Zhongchan's kung fu was so high that other than those old monsters, no one could surpass him. Moreover, he had a high status in the Jianghu. No one knew who instigated such a person to come alone, which really caught everyone off guard. "Shut up," he shouted angrily. "I've already exiled myself from the mountain. Today's matter is my own personal matter. It has nothing to do with Yun Ding Mountain. Gong Dai killed my wife and child. This enmity is absolutely irreconcilable. Even if I die, I will avenge my wife and child." Gong Yimo felt a little strange. Shui Wu 11 was indeed in their hands, but who was his child? She hadn't seen it in her previous life, so she wasn't sure. However, she definitely couldn't let them continue fighting like this. After going through so many obstacles, she had to get married today. "Your wife is Shui Wuxi, right?" Gong Yimo's voice was faint, but it made the sword in Qiu Zhongchan's hand stop. Gong Dai's sword almost slit his throat. Gong Yimo waved her round fan calmly and smiled maliciously. "She's still alive. Who said she's dead?" Gong Yimo's sharp eyes noticed that Qiu Zhongchan's eyes were wide open. She smiled lightly. "Of course, if you don't stop now, she will really die. How could this be?" Qiu Zhongchan suddenly retracted his hand and retreated. Gong Yimo also stopped Gong Dai. If they could resolve this peacefully, she didn't want to see blood on this big day. "Where is she?" Gong Dai ignored this person's questioning. He snorted coldly and walked to Gong Yimo's side. Seeing her calm expression, he knew that there were no signs of the Jiyu poison acting up. He then heaved a sigh of relief. Gong Yimo looked at him comfortingly. She then said to Qiu Zhongchan, "The last time she harmed others and herself, she was poisoned and went crazy. Do you still remember? We were afraid that she would hurt others, so we locked her in the dungeon. Not only that, in order to save her, we often tried to detoxify her. It's a pity that it didn't work." Her words were benevolent, and she spared no effort to whitewash Gongju. Qiu Zhongchan didn't care about that. His eyes were red as he stepped forward. "Where is she?" Gong Yimo chuckled softly. "We can return her to you, but you must apologize to us. Moreover, we don't even know who your child is, nor do we know whose slanderous words you've heard to ruin my big day." At the end of her sentence, her brows furrowed. Recently, she had been acting cute and coquettishly. She had forgotten the feeling of being at loggerheads. Indeed, she had been spoiled by Gong Dai. Gong Dai saw her glare and hurriedly pulled her hand. He looked like he would listen to whatever his wife said. However, his face was cold, like a demon guarding by her side. The two of them were a perfect pair, cooperating very well. When Qiu Zhongchan heard Gong Yimo's words, he hesitated. Just as he wanted to say something, a strange yet familiar voice interrupted them. "Aya! Seems like we came at the wrong time." When Gong Yimo heard this voice, her eyes widened slightly as she looked over in disbelief. It was a group of young people. They had smiles on their faces and were holding congratulatory gifts in their hands. Because Qi Manor was accepting people from all over, they didn't close the doors. Therefore, this group of people walked in without any hindrance. They looked just like ordinary people who came to congratulate them. However, Gong Yimo recognized them. No, it should be said that they were very familiar with them. In her previous life, Gong Yimo had fought on the battlefield for 10 years. The only fortunate thing was that none of the people who had followed her in the beginning had died. Among them, there were people like Li Suanian who was recruited later on. There were also people who were promoted from the bottom of the ranks. However, there were 4 brothers who had followed her all this time. Each of them were brave and fearless. In the end, they all became generals. The last time she returned to her previous life, It was like a dream but not a dream. Those generals who had defected to Gong Dai's side in the end were the four brothers. Now that they were standing in front of her, Gong Yimo suddenly felt uneasy. In this life, she had never seen them and had never deliberately looked for them. Now that they had appeared here, the uneasy feeling completely suppressed the joy of meeting after such a long time. It made her feel a chill down her spine. But no, it couldn't be. Gong Yimo shook her head. She must be overthinking things. These four people couldn't be plotting anything. They weren't greedy for power, weren't lustful, and didn't fight for benefits. Furthermore, they were unwaveringly loyal. Every time they charged, they would be at the very front to protect the country. Therefore, Gong Yimo hurriedly put away the expression on her face. Perhaps they weren't as bad as she thought. She decided to wait and see. Who are you? Gong Dai especially didn't like the smiles on their faces as he stood in front of Gong Yimo. This was the benefit of having a husband. No, it should be said that as long as Gong Dai was around, Gong Yimo didn't have to worry most of the time. She just had to hide behind him. As the people approached, Gong Yimo was shocked to find that other than the four brothers, there were many other familiar faces. However, they had all died on the battlefield. She was slightly shocked. These people, they actually knew each other from the beginning? Why didn't the four brothers mention it before? The uneasiness in her heart grew. She simply didn't dare to think about this possibility. If even the brothers who had gone through fire and water with her in her previous life were fake, then how much of a failure was she? It couldn't be. Calm down. Gong Yimo suppressed the madness in her heart and coldly looked at the few people. We are naturally here to give you gifts. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.